Somebody's mother had a pot of neck bones on the back burner every Saturday in 1974, and the whole block smelled like pepper and bay leaf before the kids came through the screen door. That smell is gone from most neighborhoods now. The women who knew what to do with chitlins, crackling bread, and pickled pig feet are fewer every year, and the kitchens they cooked in have been sold or torn down. Number 74 fed a whole family for almost nothing. The dish at number 31 sat on every church supper table from Birmingham to Chicago, and today most people under 40 have never tasted it. These foods were not replaced, they were erased quietly by frozen aisles, low-fat labels, and a generation that never got the recipe written down. Hit subscribe. Here are 100 soul foods that were normal in the 1970s but vanished today. Number 25, half-smoked sausages on the half-barrel grill. The barrel came from a corner garage in Northwest DC. Somebody cut it lengthwise with a torch on a Tuesday. Iron legs by Friday. The half-smokes came from mangers in West Baltimore, packed in butcher paper, split lengthwise so they cooked faster. The man working the fire wore a dish towel on his shoulder, the way your uncle did. He turned each link with a long fork that used to be part of a fence. The smell carried 3 blocks. Kids lined up first because the elders said so. The bun was a slice of Wonder Bread, folded once. A half smoke off that grill in 1977 cost the host nothing and fed 40 people. By 1989, the man with the torch was gone. The garage was a check cashing storefront. The grill outlived the block. Number 24, sardines and crackers. This wasn't even a sit-down meal. A working man pulled a tin from the cabinet, peeled back the lid, and ate standing over the sink. Saltine crackers on the side, maybe a slice of raw onion if there was one. No cooking, no dishes, just protein and salt after 10 hours on a loading dock. Sardines were packed in cottonseed oil or mustard sauce, and a man could keep a dozen tins in the pantry for weeks without refrigeration. The canneries in Maine and Louisiana put out millions of cans a year through the 1970s. By the 1990s, most of those canneries had closed. What replaced them was frozen fish sticks that cost 3 times as much and tasted like cardboard. Before the next one, for those who want suppers like these and the rest this channel has covered, all in one place, they are in a book called Big Mama's Soul Food Kitchen at my website, thehungryhistorian.com. That is the only mention you will get. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 25, cheese straws, sharp cheddar, grated fine, mixed with butter, flour, a shake of cayenne, and pressed through a cookie press or piped by hand onto a baking sheet. They came out thin, ridged, crisp, and salty enough to make you reach for a second handful before you finish the first. At a function, cheese straws sat in a tin near the front of the table, and the woman who brought them never wrote down what she put in the dough. The ratio of cheese to cayenne was personal. Some batches burned the back of your throat, others barely whispered. The press itself was usually older than the woman using it. When store-bought cheese, crackers became the norm, the tin stopped showing up. The press went into a drawer and stayed there.
Lima beans and rice was the simple Christmas side that stretched pennies into plates full of comfort and complete protein. Dried lima beans were soaked overnight, then simmered with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and bay leaves until creamy and tender. The beans were spooned over fluffy white rice, the cooking liquid becoming a rich gravy that tied everything together. Lima beans cost almost nothing and expanded dramatically during cooking, making a single bag feed large families. The ham hocks added smoky depth without requiring expensive cuts of meat. This dish appeared at Christmas dinners throughout Black communities in the 1970s, often overshadowed by flashier dishes, but quietly keeping everyone satisfied. Lima beans and rice proved that humble ingredients, prepared with care, created comfort worth celebrating.
Neckbone stew was the dish that made patience taste like home. Grandparents started it early, browning the bones slow until the house filled with the smell of salt, pepper, and smoke. The meat was tough at first, but they knew that time could turn even the hardest cuts tender. A pot of onions, celery, and carrots followed, simmering until the broth grew deep and rich. The bones gave flavor to everything they touched, the fat melting into gold that coated every spoonful. Sometimes potatoes joined the mix, sometimes rice, but the heart of the dish was always the same, making something out of what others overlooked. The stew bubbled for hours, humming low like a hymn on the stove. By supper, the meat slipped free from the bone, soft and ready. It fed everyone, from children to elders, warming stomachs and spirits alike. Neckbone stew was not just food, it was proof that care could turn scarcity into comfort. Every bite held a memory of waiting, stirring, tasting, and sharing. It taught that good things come slow and that nothing was ever too little when cooked with love. In every bowl lived the story of endurance, flavor, and faith that kept families strong through every hard season.
Ground beef and tomato stew appeared on stoves across every Black neighborhood that knew a hard November. Most families never gave it a proper name. They called it stew or soup or whatever's in the pot. Browned beef, diced potatoes, carrots, a can of whole tomatoes crushed by hand, an onion cut rough, and enough water to cover, salt, pepper, garlic powder, bay leaf, and thyme. An hour on low, and the potatoes thickened the broth on their own, the carrots softened, and the tomatoes dissolved until the pot turned deep rust. Families who came north during the migration recognized it immediately, a city grocery adaptation of the vegetable soups their grandmothers made in Mississippi, adjusted for whatever the corner store carried in January. A full pot cost $1 and change, fed 7 people, and reheated even better with cornbread crumbled into the bowl. Butterbean stew was creamy comfort in a bowl, made from large lima beans that broke down during cooking into something almost like a thick sauce. The beans were simmered with smoked ham hocks or bacon, their natural starch thickening the broth while pork added depth and richness. Onions and garlic were essential, as were bay leaves that perfumed the entire pot. Some families added tomatoes for color, while others preferred the pure, creamy simplicity of beans and pork. This stew was filling enough to serve as a complete meal, especially paired with cornbread that soaked up every drop of that silky broth. Children often requested seconds, not realizing how little the meal cost to prepare. Butterbean stew represented Southern cooking magic, transforming humble dried beans into something that tasted far richer. Corned beef cabbage rolls were a Sunday specialty that required patience but delivered comfort worth every minute of preparation. Large cabbage leaves were blanched until pliable, then wrapped around a filling of shredded corned beef mixed with rice, onions, and seasonings. The rolls were nestled in a baking dish covered with tomato sauce and baked slowly until the cabbage became silky. The tomato sauce caramelized at the edges, adding sweetness that balanced the salty meat. These rolls appeared at church suppers and family dinners, where they were greeted with appreciation for the effort they represented. Children learned to make them by watching their mothers carefully wrap each roll. Corned beef cabbage rolls showed how one cut of meat could be transformed through care into something elegant. Corned beef and cabbage stew was the kind of one-pot meal that simmered all afternoon, filling the house with anticipation. Chunks of corned beef were browned first for extra flavor, then covered with water and simmered with cabbage wedges, potatoes, carrots, and onions until fork tender. The broth thickened naturally from the starches in the potatoes, creating gravy that clung to every piece. Families served it in deep bowls with plenty of bread for soaking. The stew was especially popular during winter months when something warm and substantial was needed to fight the cold. It could feed a crowd and tasted even better the second day when the flavors had deepened overnight. Corned beef and cabbage stew was honest food, unpretentious but deeply satisfying and always welcome. Number 22, burgoo-style emancipation stew. The big iron pot lived in a shed behind the AME church in Marshall, Texas, year-round, and it came out for two things only, a wake and Juneteenth. It held 12 gallons. On the morning of June 19th, a grandmother in Marshall would walk it out into the yard with 3 other women and start the fire underneath at 5 in the morning. Into the pot went whatever the community had brought: a beef shank from one family, 2 chickens from another, a possum or a rabbit if a hunter had had a good week, tomatoes, corn cut off the cob, lima beans, okra, 4 pounds of potatoes, 2 whole onions, a handful of cayenne, and a quart of strong coffee for color. The women stirred the pot with a wooden paddle for 9 hours. The meat shredded into the broth, the corn thickened it, the potatoes broke down and held everything together. What most people forget about this stew is that it was never the same twice, and that was the point. It carried whatever the year had given. A good year tasted like beef and pepper. A hard year tasted like rabbit and okra. The pot fed the entire congregation off paper plates with hot water cornbread and red drink. A child got a small ladle. A working man got 2 ladles and a bone to chew. The grandmother who tended the pot never sat down until the last person had been served. After integration brought commercial catering to black church events in the late 70s, the big iron pot stayed in the shed. The last grandmother in Marshall to make the stew died in 1981, and the recipe died with her because nobody had ever written down 12 gallons of memory. I have been looking for that recipe for years, and the closest I have found is a burgoo from Kentucky that lost its black history somewhere between 1920 and the cookbook industry. Turkey. Wings were the working family's answer to a roast nobody could afford on a Tuesday. In the 1970s, turkey parts sold for less than chicken, and a pack of wings fed 4 for under $2. Seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and smoked paprika, the wings were seared until the skin blistered, then braised in a deep pan with sliced onions and gravy built from drippings, flour, broth, Worcestershire, bay leaf. 2 hours at 325, and they came out falling apart, the meat pulling from bone in long shreds, the gravy dark as coffee. Served over rice with greens, the plate looked like it cost 10 times what it did. That transformation, cheap to grand, ordinary to Sunday worthy, was the genius of black home cooking. Your aunt made them every holiday. She said the secret was the sear, burning the skin at the edge on purpose. After she passed, 3 cousins tried. None got the gravy dark enough. Fried pork chops with sawmill gravy was a dish that made ordinary weeknights feel like celebrations. The chops were seasoned simply with salt and pepper, dredged in flour, and fried in a cast iron skillet until the crust turned golden and the meat stayed juicy inside. The drippings left behind became the foundation for sawmill gravy. Flour stirred into the hot fat, then milk added slowly while scraping up every flavorful bit stuck to the pan. The gravy was poured over the chops and served with rice or biscuits that soaked up the creamy, peppery sauce. In the 1970s, this dish appeared on tables across Black America, affordable enough for any budget, yet satisfying enough to make everyone feel fed. The gravy stretched the meal, turning 2 pork chops into dinner for 4 when served over enough starch. Number 19, stewed chicken feet. This is the dish that separated the regulars from the people who had just wandered in. Chicken feet were cleaned, scaled in boiling water to remove the outer skin, and simmered for hours in a gravy made with onions, garlic, celery, and enough black pepper to make your nose run. The feet themselves were almost entirely skin, cartilage, and tendon, with no real meat on them at all. The appeal was the texture. After hours of stewing, the cartilage softened into something between gelatin and fat, and sucking the bones clean was the only way to eat them. Nobody pretended it was elegant. A bowl of stewed chicken feet at a juke joint was a test of where you came from. If you knew how to eat them, you belonged. If you did not, nobody explained it to you. The dish cost almost nothing to make because chicken feet were throwaway parts that processors sold by the bag or gave away for free. Juke joint cooks turned waste into a meal that people craved, and the seasoning in that gravy was never the same twice. Some added a splash of vinegar at the end. Others dropped in a dried red pepper that floated on top like a warning. The smell alone divided the room. People who loved it leaned closer. People who did not move to the other end of the counter. When commercial poultry processing moved to automated plants in the 1970s and 1980s, the feet were sorted, frozen, and exported overseas in bulk rather than sold to local cooks by the bag. The cheap, easy supply dried up overnight. The stew disappeared from the counter, not because people stopped wanting it, but because the feet stopped showing up at the back door. The juke joint was never supposed to exist. It grew out of Jim Crow, out of the plain fact that Black Southerners were locked out of restaurants, dance halls, and hotels, so they built their own. A front room cleared of furniture on a Friday afternoon, a porch with a tin roof and a bare bulb, a kitchen in the back with one woman running the stove from sundown until the last person left. The food was not a side attraction. It was the reason half the people walked through the door. You came for the music, but you stayed for the plate. And the cook who ran that kitchen answered to nobody. She decided the menu based on what she could get that morning. She set the price. She told you when the food was gone, and when it was gone, there was no second batch. Fried fatback and eggs was breakfast that proved even the cheapest meat could anchor a morning meal. Fatback, pure pork fat, sliced from the pig's back, was what poor families bought when bacon was beyond reach. Sliced thin and fried, slow in cast iron, it rendered into crispy strips, swimming in grease while filling the kitchen with a smell that announced breakfast was serious. The eggs came next, fried in that fat until their edges lace brown, the yolk still soft. Together they made a plate that was rich, salty, and filling enough to carry anyone through until lunch. Fatback had no meat, just pure fat providing calories and flavor. It was what the poor could afford, the part wealthier families didn't want. This breakfast was survival food that refused to pretend otherwise. Oatmeal for dinner was the meal no one talked about outside the house, because breakfast food at supper time meant things had gotten desperate. Mothers cooked a large pot of oats, sometimes sweetened with sugar, sometimes salted and served plain, stretching a box that cost pennies into a meal that filled every belly at the table. The oatmeal was thick and warm, sticking to ribs and helping children sleep without hunger waking them. There was no shame inside the kitchen, only practicality and quiet understanding that food was food regardless of when it appeared. Children ate their bowls without complaint, knowing better than to ask for something else. Oatmeal for dinner meant the pantry was nearly bare but not empty. It meant survival was still possible. The taste of plain oats still carries that memory for those who lived it. Number 24, red beans and rice in a foil tray. The pot started Friday night on a back burner in a fourth floor walk-up in Brownsville. Red beans soaked in a coffee can. A ham hock sat on top, jaw still attached. Your grandmother went to bed and woke up to a pot that smelled like a sundae she had not had since Lake Charles. Saturday morning, the rice went in a separate pan because rice and beans needed their own dignity. Both came down the stairs in a foil hotel pan set on a folding table. A spoon stayed in the tray all afternoon. The serving woman did not need to ask twice. She knew who was coming back for seconds. She knew who would say no and mean yes. The recipe came up from Louisiana on a Greyhound in 1962 and ended on Sutter Avenue by 1986 when the building got sold and the elders moved out. 2 generations, 1 pot. Number 22, neck bones and rice. This was a proper supper, and the women who made it treated it with seriousness the name didn't deserve. Pork neck bones, the cheapest cut at the butcher counter, slow cooked for 3 hours until the meat pulled away from the bone with a nudge. The broth thickened into a gravy that soaked through a mound of white rice. A pot of this fed 4 people for under $1. In the black neighborhoods of Memphis and Houston, neck bones were what a woman put on the stove in the morning before she left for her own job, so it would be ready when her husband walked through the door. The bone marrow flavored everything it touched. Butcher shops used to practically give these away. Today, they sit behind grocery store glass at specialty prices. Nobody in 1974 called a neck bone artisanal. They called it Tuesday. Number 24, ham salad sandwiches. A baked ham left over from Sunday dinner, fed through a hand-crank meat grinder, bolted to the kitchen table. The ground meat was mixed with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, a boiled egg chopped fine, and a spoon of yellow mustard. It went onto soft white bread, cut into triangles, and stacked on a plate under a sheet of wax paper. Ham salad stretched one leftover roast into enough sandwiches to feed a card table full of guests. The grinder did the work, and the sound of it turning was as familiar in a black kitchen as the hum of the refrigerator. Children stood next to the table and watched the pink curls come out the other end, waiting to scrape the plate. When the grinder disappeared from the kitchen and the deli counter started selling sliced ham by the pound, the salad lost its starting point. Nobody ground ham by choice when they could buy it sliced.
Smoked ham steaks were the weeknight luxury that became Christmas tradition when whole hams cost more than budgets allowed. Thick slices of smoked ham were fried in cast iron skillets until the edges caramelized and the fat rendered into crispy ribbons. Some cooks glazed them with brown sugar and pineapple juice, creating sticky sweetness that balanced the salt. Ham steaks cost far less per pound than whole hams, yet delivered the same smoky flavor families associated with holiday celebration. They cooked quickly, making them practical for busy Christmas mornings when ovens were occupied with other dishes. Children loved the crispy edges, while adults appreciated the economy. Smoked ham steaks proved that celebration didn't require spending beyond your means, just knowing how to make affordable cuts shine.
Lima beans and rice were the heartbeat of humble suppers. The dry beans soaked overnight in cool water, swelling with promise. The next morning, they simmered with onions, salt, and sometimes a scrap of ham or a spoon of lard for flavor. The smell drifted through small kitchens, soft and soothing, like the memory of peace. When the beans turned creamy, rice joined the plate, a mound of comfort waiting to catch every drop of the broth. It was food that filled you without fuss, a steady meal that kept the body strong and the soul calm. Grandparents stirred it slow, never wasting a grain or bean. The dish stretched across days, reheated, shared, and remembered. Each bite was a reminder that survival could taste good, that frugality did not mean lack. Lima beans and rice were the taste of balance, simple, complete, and deeply human. When money was thin and work was long, this was the dinner that never failed. A pot of patience feeding everyone who came hungry.
Hamburger steak with onion gravy hit the table more nights than most people want to admit, not because it was boring, but because it worked. You took a pound of ground beef, maybe 59 cents at the A&P in 1970, mixed it with salt, black pepper, a little garlic powder, and shaped thick oval patties with your hands. No egg, no breadcrumbs in the old school version. You seared those patties in a cast iron skillet until the crust turned almost black, then pulled them out and dropped sliced onions into that hot grease. The onions went soft and golden while you stirred in flour, scraping up every bit of foam stuck to the bottom. Water or broth went in next, whisked smooth, and the patties came back to simmer until the gravy thickened and the whole kitchen smelled like someone's mama was home. Served over white rice with canned green beans, it fed 5 people for under $2. Your grandmother never measured the flour. She just knew, and nobody who came after her has ever gotten that gravy quite right. Oxtail stew was once the crown jewel of winter cooking in black households, simmered low and slow until the meat fell away from the bone in tender ribbons. The oxtails were seared in a heavy pot until caramelized, then braised with onions, garlic, tomatoes, and root vegetables. Thyme, bay leaves, and allspice gave the broth a depth that filled the kitchen with warmth long before dinner was served. The marrow melted into the liquid, creating richness that no store-bought broth could match. Families gathered around for this dish on Sunday evenings, knowing one pot could feed everyone with enough left for Monday. The stew represented transformation, turning what butchers once discarded into something magnificent. Children learned early that the best flavor lived in the bones. Corned beef hash with fried cabbage was Monday morning's answer to Sunday's leftovers, a dish that turned scraps into something families look forward to. The corned beef was chopped into small cubes and fried in a cast iron skillet with diced potatoes and onions until crispy edges formed, while shredded cabbage was added and cooked until caramelized. The combination created a symphony of textures: crispy meat, tender potatoes, and sweet cabbage mingling together. Topped with a fried egg, its runny yolk became natural gravy. This dish was about making the most of what remained. Families understood that wasting food was unacceptable, and this hash proved that creativity could transform leftovers into a meal worth remembering. The smell of it frying filled kitchens with warmth. Number 29, smothered yard bird with rice gravy. The cooks pulled the chicken from the yard that morning, plucked it on the back porch, and had it on the stove by 10. A yard bird was not a fryer. It was a working hen, tough, lean, with dark meat that needed 2 hours of low heat to surrender. The cook dredged the pieces in seasoned flour, browned them in lard, then poured a quart of chicken broth over the top and let it whisper on the back burner. The gravy thickened from the flour clinging to the skin. She served it over white rice that had cooked in the same pot the chicken had simmered in. A whole hen fed 9 people on a holiday afternoon. After 1972, grocery store fryers and packaged gravy mix replaced this dish in most kitchens. Nobody pulled a hen from the yard anymore. Salmon croquettes were the Friday night constant in black kitchens across the South and every city the Great Migration touched. A can of pink salmon, bones left in and crushed into the mix for calcium, a trick passed down without ever hearing the word nutrition. The salmon was flaked with a fork, folded with cracker crumbs, egg, diced onion, and black pepper. Some cooks added hot sauce, Others stirred in yellow mustard, and that difference was the line between one family's recipe and another's. The patties hit a cast iron skillet of shimmering Crisco, and the sizzle was the dinner bell. You heard it from the porch. Golden and crisp outside, warm and soft in the center, they came with grits or white rice. You could follow the recipe exactly today, but without her standing over that skillet in her housecoat, flipping them with a fork she never washed between batches, they will never taste the same. Hog maw stuffed with sausage was the centerpiece of holiday tables in Black households throughout the 1970s, a dish that demanded respect and patience in equal measure. The hog stomach was cleaned meticulously for hours, then stuffed with seasoned sausage, potatoes, onions, and cabbage before slow roasting until golden and crisp. This dish filled homes with an aroma that announced celebration. Families gathered as it was sliced thick and served alongside greens, each portion carrying the richness of rendered fat and spiced meat. The stomach itself cost almost nothing, yet transformed into something that fed a crowd and honored tradition. Today, it has nearly disappeared, but those who remember it recall the pride of serving something so deeply rooted in heritage. Number 25, fried buffalo fish. In the Mississippi Delta, catfish got all the fame, but buffalo fish was the real prize at a juke joint. Pulled from rivers and oxbow lakes, it was a thick, bony freshwater fish that required patience to eat and skill to fry. The cook scored the flesh in a crosshatch pattern to break up the tiny bones, dredged it in seasoned cornmeal, and dropped it into a skillet of hot oil until the outside turned to a shell. You picked around the bones with your fingers. Nobody used a fork. By the 1980s, commercial catfish farming had flooded the market with boneless filets, and the demand for wild-caught buffalo fish collapsed. The fishermen who supplied the juke joints moved on or retired. The fish is still swimming in those rivers. The people who knew how to fry it are mostly gone. Sugar bread was the breakfast treat that cost almost nothing but made children feel special. A slice of white bread was spread with butter or margarine, then sprinkled with white sugar until it sparkled. Sometimes it was eaten cold, the sugar crunching with every bite. Other times, mothers toasted it under the broiler until the sugar melted into a thin, caramelized crust. Either way, it was sweet and satisfying, a moment of joy for children who didn't have candy or store-bought treats. The cost was pennies, but the happiness was real. Sugar bread appeared in lunch boxes and on breakfast plates when that's all there was. It was poor kid food that felt like indulgence, turning plain bread into something worth anticipating. This breakfast reminded children that sweetness didn't require money. Water, gravy, and biscuits was the meal that appeared when milk ran out, but flour and drippings remained. Mothers would heat leftover bacon grease in a cast iron skillet, stir in flour until it browned, then add water instead of milk to create a thin but savory gravy. The gravy was poured hot over split biscuits, which soaked up every drop and turned soft on the tongue. It was bland compared to milk gravy, but for hungry children, it was a warm meal that filled the emptiness inside. Families made water gravy without shame because it kept everyone fed when resources were scarce. The dish required only pantry staples most households had on hand, making it reliable during the hardest stretches of the month. Water gravy was a lesson in making something from almost nothing, a skill passed down through generations who knew hunger. Number 22, smothered chicken backs in a foil hotel pan. Chicken backs were the part the butcher could not sell on Friday. They went home in a brown bag for 30 cents a pound. Saturday morning, they got dredged in flour, browned in lard, smothered in onion gravy. Your grandmother layered them into a foil tray with the gravy poured over. The tray sat on the radio in the living room while she got dressed. Down on the curb, the tray went on a folding table next to the rice. A serving spoon stood up in the gravy, like a steak in soft ground. A child carrying a paper plate held it with two hands because the gravy was still hot. The backs were almost all bone. The reward was the gravy on the rice. The thing is, the backs were never the point. The gravy was the point. By 1985, the butcher who sold the backs had closed. Number 21, hot water cornbread. Cornmeal, salt, and boiling water. That was the entire recipe. A woman mixed it with her hands, shaped it into ovals, and fried them in a skillet of hot grease. The outside cracked when a man bit into it. The inside was dense and almost sweet. This was not the cornbread from a box mix. This was cornbread that predated the Civil War, passed through Reconstruction and 2 world wars without changing by a single ingredient. A working man might eat 6 of these with a bowl of greens and call it done. The mixed companies pushed their sweetened cake-like cornbread so hard that hot water cornbread disappeared from most kitchens. The women who knew how to shape it by feel are mostly gone now. Their hands knew the right temperature before any thermometer could. Here's something worth pausing for. None of these meals ever appeared in a cookbook, not one. The women who made them didn't write recipes down because there was nothing to write. A pinch, a handful, enough water to make it hold. They cooked from memory that reached back through their mothers and grandmothers to kitchens with no running water and no electric stove. The American food industry spent the 1970s and 1980s convincing families that convenience was the same thing as progress. Frozen dinners, boxed mixes, canned sauces with ingredient lists longer than a man's arm, and the suppers on this list, the ones that cost nothing and fed everyone, started disappearing. Not because they stopped tasting good, because the women who made them were told their cooking was backward, and the men who ate them were too tired to argue. What happened wasn't an accident, it was a replacement. Number 22, watermelon rind pickles. After the red flesh was eaten, the rind got peeled, cubed, and soaked overnight in lime water to firm it up. Then it was simmered in a syrup of sugar, vinegar, cinnamon sticks, and whole cloves until the cubes turned translucent and sweet enough to eat like candy. A jar of watermelon rind pickles sat on the relish tray at summer functions next to the bread and butter pickles and the olives. Making them took 2 days and a willingness to save what most people threw away. The jars lined the pantry shelf like stained glass, and the women who made them traded recipes at church the way other people traded gossip. When watermelon became something you bought pre-cut in a plastic container, the rind never made it home. The sweetest part of the fruit was the part everyone learned to throw away.
Turkey wings and gravy were the 1970s answer to expensive whole turkeys, stretching holiday budgets while delivering all the flavor families craved. Wings were seasoned with garlic powder, onion powder, paprika, salt, and pepper, then browned in hot oil until the skin crisped golden. The wings were transferred to roasting pans, covered with rich gravy made from drippings and broth, then baked until the meat fell from the bone. Mothers bought wings by the flat since they cost a fraction of whole birds, yet fed families generously. The gravy soaked into rice or dressing, making every bite feel like celebration. Turkey wings appeared on Christmas tables throughout Black neighborhoods, proving that smart shopping created feasts rivaling any expensive spread.
Turkey necks with gravy turned what many ignored into something worth craving. Grandparents browned the necks first, letting them sizzle in a pan until the air filled with a smoky richness. A bit of flour, water, and thyme turned the drippings into thick brown gravy that coated every piece like velvet. The meat cooked for hours until it slipped clean off the bone, tender and rich with flavor. Served over rice or mashed potatoes, it looked simple but tasted like a feast. The necks may have been cheap, but the love behind them was priceless. Grandparents made the most of what they had, and this meal proved their creativity and care. The gravy was the best part, seasoned just right, spooned generously so nothing went to waste. Everyone at the table ate slow, grateful for the warmth, the smell, and the moment. It was Sunday flavor on a weekday budget, the taste of making do without feeling poor. Turkey necks with gravy were more than a meal. They were a celebration of resilience and resourcefulness that lived in every kitchen where pride cooked alongside hunger.
The ground beef and rice skillet was a Monday through Friday revelation in Black households across Detroit, Chicago, and every city that caught the tail end of the Great Migration. 1 pound of beef, 1 cup of rice, 1 bell pepper, 1 onion, a can of tomatoes, and dinner was done. You browned the meat first, always in the same skillet your mother had seasoned for years, and the grease stayed in because that was the flavor. Onion and pepper went in next, then the rice raw, right into the pan with the tomatoes and enough water to cover. Lid on, 20 minutes, no stirring. You learned the no stirring rule the hard way because lifting that lid let the steam out and left you with crunchy rice and a ruined evening. The rice soaked up everything, and what came out tasted like it took hours. The whole dish ran under $1.50 and left enough for tomorrow's lunch, packed in a Cool Whip container. Pig feet stew was hearty winter fare that transformed an overlooked cut into something families craved when temperatures dropped. The feet were split, cleaned thoroughly, and simmered for hours until the skin became tender and natural gelatin thickened the broth into something luxurious. Onions, garlic, vinegar, and crushed red pepper created a tangy heat that cut through the richness. Some families added potatoes or beans to stretch the meal. The stew was made in large batches because it kept well and improved after sitting overnight in the refrigerator. The gelatin would set into a jiggly mass that liquefied again when reheated. This dish required patience. Rushing meant tough, chewy results. Children watched mothers and grandmothers tend these pots, learning that good food took time. Pig feet stew proved nothing went to waste. Corned beef and cabbage soup was the kind of dish that stretched a little into a lot, feeding large families on cold winter evenings when warmth mattered as much as flavor. The broth was built from bones and trimmings of corned beef, simmered for hours with bay leaves, peppercorns, and onion until it developed rich depth. Chunks of tender corned beef joined wedges of cabbage, carrots, and potatoes, creating a soup hearty enough to serve as a complete meal. Families ladled it into deep bowls and served it with thick slices of cornbread for soaking up every drop. The soup could be reheated for days, improving each time. It represented the wisdom of making one piece of meat feed a family for an entire week, stretching resources without sacrificing satisfaction. Number 30, pearl tea cakes. In Galveston in 1866, the first Juneteenth tea cakes came out of a wood burning stove that still smelled like the slavery the women had walked out of the year before. Pearl tea cakes were not fancy. Flour, lard, sugar, a little nutmeg, sometimes a splash of buttermilk if the cow had given that morning. The dough was rolled out on a clean piece of muslin and cut with the rim of a tin cup. They baked in 12 minutes. The cookies came out the color of old ivory, soft in the middle, crisp at the edges, and the women would stack them in a tin to keep them from drying. Children carried them in their pockets to the celebration. By 1975, they were gone from most Black households, replaced by Nabisco, Freedom used to taste like nutmeg and warm lard. Smothered chicken with onion gravy turned the cheapest parts of the bird into something that made grown men go quiet at the table. In the 1970s, whole chickens cost less than $1 a pound, and your mother stretched one across Sunday dinner and Monday lunch. She seasoned thighs and legs with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, dredged them in flour, and browned them in cast iron until the crust went deep gold. The chicken came out. Thick sliced onions went in, sizzling in the drippings until they collapsed into something sweet. Flour went back into the fat, stirred fast, then broth hit the pan in a rush of steam that fogged the windows. The chicken returned, the lid came down, and the whole thing simmered an hour until the meat slid off the bone. Spooned over white rice, the gravy soaked through every grain. You knew it was done when the smell changed from sharp to deep and round. Only the person at the stove could read that moment. Before the rest of the house stirred, the oxtail stew with butter beans was Sunday dinner royalty, a dish that required time and attention, but rewarded with flavors that seemed to echo through generations. Oxtails were seared until caramelized, then braised slowly with tomatoes, onions, garlic, thyme, and allspice until the meat surrendered from the bone. Butter beans were added in the final hour, absorbing the rich gravy while holding their shape. The marrow from the bones melted into the sauce, creating natural richness that no store-bought product could replicate. Served over rice or with crusty bread, this stew was reserved for occasions that mattered. Those who mastered oxtail stew earned reputations that spread through churches and neighborhoods, their pots requested at every gathering. Number 23, fried whiting. Whiting was the juke joint fish you ordered when catfish was gone. It was cheaper, thinner, and fried faster, which made it the last thing a cook could put out before the oil cooled down for the night. The fish was dredged whole in seasoned cornmeal and fried until the tail curled and the skin crackled when you bit through it. A plate of fried whiting with hot sauce and 2 slices of white bread was a full meal for coins. Whiting was Atlantic coast fish, shipped frozen inland to towns that never saw the ocean. The bones were small enough to eat if you fried them hard, and most people did. When frozen fish sticks and breaded fast food fillets took over the market, whole fried whiting became a regional memory that younger cooks never bothered to learn. Fried salt pork and gravy was the breakfast that made something substantial from the cheapest cuts the butcher offered. Salt pork, preserved in brine and packed with fat, could be sliced thin and fried until the edges crisped and the fat rendered into the pan. That rendered fat became the base for gravy, thickened with flour and stretched with water or milk. Poured over biscuits, the gravy turned a few slices of pork into a meal that fed a whole table. The meat was chewy and intensely salty, a flavor children learned to tolerate because there wasn't anything else. This breakfast represented poverty's reality where fresh bacon was too expensive. The gravy smoothed the salt and made everything feel richer. Salt pork gravy was poor food that refused to apologize. Sugar water was the drink that filled cups when Kool-Aid ran out and milk was saved for morning cereal. Mothers stirred spoonfuls of white sugar into glasses of tap water, creating a sweet drink that cost almost nothing but gave children something to sip with meager suppers. The sweetness hit the tongue fast, providing a quick rush that made hunger feel less sharp. In summer, sugar water was served cold with ice. In winter, it was warmed on the stove, turning it into something that felt almost like a treat. Children drank it without question, because asking for more meant drawing attention to what the household lacked. Sugar water was never discussed at school, but in kitchens across black neighborhoods, it was poured quietly into cups night after night. It was hydration with just enough sweetness to make poverty taste less bitter. Number 21, your auntie's potato salad with mustard yellow. The recipe lived in one woman's head and changed by mood. Mustard, mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, hard-boiled egg, paprika on top, never raisins, never apple. The bowl was a Tupperware big enough to bathe a small dog in. She covered it with the same lid she had owned since 1969. She carried it down herself, set it on the table herself, lifted the lid herself, because if you opened her bowl and stuck a wrong spoon in, she would know. You would hear about it next Sunday. Children knew not to ask whose salad it was. The shape of the bowl told them. By 1990, the auntie had moved out to Yonkers. The niece took the recipe wrong, and the bowl sat empty on a high shelf in a kitchen no grandchild visited on Saturdays. Number 23, Vienna sausages straight from the can. These were the meal a man ate when there was nothing else and no time to fix it. A small tin of pale sausages packed in broth. No plate necessary, no heating required. A pull tab lid and a fork, or sometimes just fingers. In mill towns across Alabama and Mississippi, a tin of Vienna sausages could be bought for pocket change and eaten in the truck before the end of a shift. Nobody celebrated this food. It simply existed. The sodium content was enormous and the flavor was debatable, but it sat in the stomach and let a man sleep. Armour and Libby's sold these by the trainload. The cans got smaller, the price climbed, and the men who ate them as supper were replaced by a generation that had never seen the inside of a steel mill. Number 21, caramel cake, a yellow layer, cake covered in a cooked caramel icing that required standing over the stove with a wooden spoon, stirring sugar and butter until it reached the exact shade of amber that separated a good caramel cake from a burned one. The icing had to be poured and spread fast before it hardened, and if you waited 10 seconds too long, the whole batch seized into a grainy mess. Caramel cake was a test of nerve. The women who made it well were known for it across the church. The ones who brought it to a function carried it like a trophy. Younger bakers avoided it because the icing punished anyone who looked away from the pot. Box mix frosting replaced it, and the difference was obvious to anyone who remembered the real thing.
Fried okra with tomatoes was the summer garden dish that appeared on Christmas tables when families preserved their harvest to last through winter. Okra was sliced, dredged in seasoned cornmeal, and fried until crispy before being combined with stewed tomatoes seasoned with onion and pepper. The combination balanced the okra's texture with tomato acidity, while the cornmeal added satisfying crunch. Families who grew their own okra and tomatoes made this dish for almost nothing. It connected Christmas celebrations to summer gardens and the work of putting food by. Fried okra with tomatoes represented the cycle of seasons that shaped soul food traditions. The dish proved that Christmas abundance came from year-round planning.
Rice and gravy suppers were the soul of weeknight dinners, simple and satisfying. Grandparents browned whatever they had, chicken scraps, neck bones, or even onions alone, to make a base for the gravy. The drippings told the story, turning flour and water into gold. The smell was deep and comforting, rising from the pan like a promise. Hot rice waited patiently in a pot nearby, ready to soak up every drop. It was not fancy, but it was enough to fill every stomach and calm every worry. The first spoonful always tasted like home, salty and rich, carrying the flavor of care. When times were lean, the gravy was thin, but the love stayed thick. Every plate was scraped clean, nothing left behind. It was the dinner that kept families steady, warm, and thankful. proof that comfort did not need luxury, just a stove, some rice, and a little faith. It fed more than hunger. It fed hope. Grandparents knew that a good pot of gravy could fix most of life's small troubles. Sometimes it was made with leftover roast or chicken drippings saved from the night before. Other times it was built from nothing more than fat and flour, stirred until the color turned perfect. The magic was in the patience, the slow whisk, the right smell, the moment it thickened. In that moment, the kitchen turned into a place of peace.
Ground beef chili in a black household was nothing like what showed up at a Texas cook-off. There was no argument about beans. Of course there were beans, because beans stretched the meat, and that was the whole point. You browned the beef with onion and green pepper, stirred in tomato paste, kidney beans, chili powder, cumin, and garlic, then let it simmer until the liquid thickened enough to hold the spoon upright, and you never served it in a bowl by itself. It went over white rice, always rice, because rice was 5 pounds for 60 cents, and it doubled the number of mouths a single pot could feed. Some women added a teaspoon of sugar to soften the acid, a detail you either understood or you did not. By Friday, reheated twice, the flavors fully married, that chili tasted better than it did on Wednesday. It was the kind of dish that improved with patience, the same way the women who made it had improved everything around them through patience alone. Kidney bean stew was a thick, satisfying pot of comfort that required little more than dried beans, seasoning, and patience. The beans were soaked overnight, then simmered with onions, garlic, tomatoes, and whatever smoked meat the family had, often a ham bone or salt pork. The result was a rich, brick red stew that clung to rice and soaked into cornbread beautifully. Some cooks added bell peppers and celery, creating something close to simplified red beans and rice. This stew was Monday tradition in many households, made while laundry was done. Children came home from school to find it bubbling on the stove, its aroma promising warmth. The beans provided protein that stretched across several meals, and the broth was considered almost as valuable as the beans themselves. Classic Sunday corned beef and cabbage was the centerpiece of countless African-American dinner tables during the 1970s, a dish that brought families together and filled homes with rich, savory aromas. The corned beef was simmered low and slow until tender enough to shred with a fork, while the cabbage softened in the meat's broth until it absorbed every drop of flavor. Families served it alongside cornbread or buttered potatoes, stretching the meal to feed everyone. The dish was both affordable and filling, making it practical for households on tight budgets. Children grew up expecting it every Sunday, while adults valued its reliability and warmth. It was not fancy, but it carried pride and comfort in every bite. Classic Sunday corned beef and cabbage was more than dinner. It was tradition, memory, and the taste of home. Number 28, hot water cornbread. The smell of cornmeal hitting hot pork fat used to drift out of every Juneteenth kitchen in East Texas. Hot water cornbread was not the cornbread of a casserole dish. It was the cornbread of a hot iron skillet and 10 fingers. The cook stirred boiling water into yellow cornmeal, added salt and a spoon of bacon grease, then patted the dough into flat cakes the size of a saucer. She fried them in shallow grease until the outside cracked golden and the inside steamed white. By the late 70s, the cornmeal mix bought in a box pushed this off the table. There was tomato gravy simmering on the back burner, and you could smell the bacon fat cutting through the sharpness of canned tomatoes from under your blanket. The dish needed nothing expensive, just drippings saved in the coffee can by the stove, a tablespoon of flour stirred until it browned, and a can of stewed tomatoes crushed by hand into the skillet. A pinch of sugar took the acid down. The gravy was poured thick over white rice and eaten with a spoon, sometimes alongside fried eggs or salt pork. It came from Depression-era black kitchens where one can of tomatoes fed a household of 8, and it traveled north to Detroit and Chicago inside the memories of women who never stopped cooking it. Through the 70s, it held on as a weekday standard, the kind nobody wrote down. You made it the way your mother showed you, and if you asked for measurements, she would shake her head and say, "Pour until it looks right." Salmon croquettes were the answer to tight budgets, transforming a can of salmon into crispy golden patties that made breakfast or dinner feel complete. The canned fish was mixed with eggs, onions, flour, and seasoning, then shaped into ovals and fried until the outside crackled with each bite. Inside, the salmon stayed moist and flaky. These croquettes appeared on tables across Black America in the 1970s, served with grits for breakfast or rice for supper. Canned salmon was affordable and shelf-stable, making it reliable when fresh meat was beyond reach. Mothers learned to stretch one can to feed 5 people. The smell of salmon croquettes, sizzling in cast iron, became the soundtrack of countless mornings, a familiar comfort that signaled a warm start to the day. Number 21, smoked sausage links with saltine crackers. The sausage was cut into thick coins on a wooden board behind the counter and fanned out on a plate next to a sleeve of crackers. No mustard, no bread. You stacked a piece of sausage on a cracker and ate it in one bite. The smoke flavor did all the work. In rural towns across Alabama and Mississippi, a local smokehouse supplied the links, and every cook had a favorite maker whose sausage she refused to substitute. When those small smokehouses closed or sold to larger processors, the flavor changed overnight. The national brands that replaced them tasted like salt and liquid smoke poured from a bottle. Same shape, same color, nothing behind it. The crackers stayed the same. The sausage never did. Molasses and biscuits was the breakfast Black children ate when butter was too dear and jam was luxury. Biscuits came from the oven, hot and steaming, split open with fingers, their soft insides waiting to soak up whatever sweetness was available. Molasses, thick and dark, was drizzled from jars that sat on every poor family's table because it cost less than sugar. The flavor was earthy and deeply sweet, almost smoky, coating the tongue with richness that white sugar never matched. Children poked holes in their biscuits and watched the molasses pool before each bite. It was simple food carrying centuries of tradition. Molasses provided iron that growing children needed. This wasn't dessert, but breakfast, a reminder that poverty didn't mean going without something sweet. Fatback and cabbage was a dish that announced lean times without anyone speaking about money. Fatback, the thick slab of pork fat, was cheap because it contained almost no meat. But when sliced and fried until crispy, then simmered with shredded cabbage, it transformed into something rich, savory, and deeply satisfying. The rendered fat coated every strand of cabbage, giving vegetables a silky texture and porky depth that made them irresistible. Families ate this with cornbread, using the bread to soak up the flavorful pot liquor at the bottom of the bowl. It was poor folks' food, but it never tasted like poverty when made by hands that knew how to coax flavor from almost nothing. Children who grew up eating fatback and cabbage carry the memory of that smoky, comforting taste long after circumstances changed. Number 23, yellow rice with peas. On the border blocks where Bed-Stuy met East New York, the Puerto Rican families lived 3 doors down from the black families. Somebody always brought arroz con gandules. The rice was the color of a school bus, like a crayon nobody had used yet. Achiote oil in a jar on the shelf. pigeon peas from a can with the label your mother could not read, a piece of pork shoulder cubed and seared in the bottom of the pot before the rice went in. The whole thing came down in a Reynolds tray. The auntie who carried it had a towel folded under one corner because the bottom was hot. Black kids ate it next to the curry goat. Puerto Rican kids ate it next to the collards. Nobody asked whose food was whose. By the late 1980s, the families were spread across 3 boroughs, and the trays did not meet on the same block again. Number 20, stewed tomatoes and rice, a can of whole tomatoes, a pot of white rice, salt, pepper, and maybe a spoon of sugar to cut the acid. That was supper. It sounds like poverty, and it was, but it was also one of the best tasting cheap meals a person could put together in under 20 minutes. The tomatoes broke apart in the pot and turned the rice pink. A working man ate this with a piece of cornbread on the side and didn't think twice about it. Stewed tomatoes and rice showed up in shotgun houses from New Orleans to Charlotte, always made the same way, always eaten without ceremony. The dish vanished, not because it failed, but because it was too simple to survive a generation that measured food by how complicated it looked on a plate. Number 23, congealed salad. Every church supper in the 1970s had at least one Jell-O mold sitting on the dessert table, except it was not a dessert, it was a salad. Lime gelatin mixed with crushed pineapple, cream cheese, and chopped pecans, poured into a ring mold and chilled until firm. Some versions used orange gelatin with shredded carrots. Others went with cherry and cottage cheese. The mold was the point. It arrived at the table looking like a crown, jiggling on a glass plate, and everyone knew exactly who brought it because the same woman brought it every single time. Younger generations killed it, not with criticism, just with silence. They stopped eating it, stopped requesting it, and eventually the woman who made it stopped bringing it. The ring mold went into the cabinet next to the good china, and both collected the same dust.
Turnip green pot liquor was the liquid gold that 1970s black families refused to waste, knowing its value went beyond the greens themselves. After turnip greens simmered for hours with smoked meat, the remaining broth held vitamins, minerals, and deep savory flavor. Some families sipped it straight from cups, while others soaked cornbread in bowls of the greenish liquid. Pot liquor was given to the sick and elderly, believed to restore strength. On Christmas, it represented the philosophy of waste nothing that sustained black families through generations. Children learned to appreciate pot liquor by watching elders savor every drop. The practice connected 1970s tables to ancestors who understood nourishment came in many forms. Pot liquor proved that soul food wisdom extended beyond recipes.
Fried mackerel fillets brought the sea to the table without breaking the bank. Grandparents bought them salted, sometimes canned, sometimes fresh if the market was kind. Each fillet was rinsed, dried, then dredged in cornmeal seasoned with pepper and a touch of cayenne. When they hit the hot grease, the kitchen came alive with crackles and curls of steam. The fish fried golden brown, the smell sharp and inviting. Served with grits, collard greens, or a slice of cornbread, it was a full meal made from little. The first bite carried crunch, then warmth, then salt that lingered like the memory of the coast. Children learned to eat carefully, picking around the small bones with patience. For many, fried mackerel was the taste of survival and skill, of knowing how to turn thrift into comfort. It was eaten with laughter, with stories of better days and pride in how far they had come. Every piece told the truth that even a poor man's fish could taste like celebration when cooked with love.
She started those pinto beans the night before, always the night before. Dried pintos soaked in water on the counter while the house slept, and by morning, they were swollen and ready. A half pound of ground beef went in first, browned with onion and garlic, and then the drained beans on top with enough water to cover by 2 inches. Bay leaf, salt pork if she had it. That pot sat on a back burner all afternoon, lid cracked, filling the house with a smell that told every child on the block what was for dinner. Slow cooking legumes with small amounts of meat traces directly to West African one-pot stews, and in the rural South, pinto beans had been stretching meals since long before emancipation. By the early 1970s, a bag of dried pintos cost 15 cents, the beef about 60, and the whole pot fed 8 with cornbread on the side. You knew they were done when the broth turned creamy on its own without adding a thing. Turkey wing stew appeared on tables in winter, especially after holidays when turkey parts went on sale. The wings were large enough to provide substantial meat while remaining affordable for families watching every dollar. They were browned in a heavy pot until the skin crisped, then covered with water and simmered with onions, celery, carrots, and potatoes. The dark meat stayed moist through long cooking, becoming tender enough to fall from the bone. Bay, leaves, and thyme added depth without cost, and some cooks stirred in tomato paste for color. This stew fed families for days, the broth growing more flavorful with each reheating. Children loved pulling the meat from bones themselves, making dinner feel interactive. Turkey wing stew represented smart shopping and smarter cooking, turning sale items into meals that felt abundant. Fried corned beef and cabbage patties were one of those clever creations that turned leftovers into something children actually asked for by name. Leftover corned beef was shredded fine and mixed with mashed potatoes, finely chopped cabbage, eggs, and seasoning until it held together in thick patties. These were dredged in flour and fried in bacon grease until golden brown and crispy on both sides while staying soft inside. The patties were served hot with mustard or hot sauce, creating a handheld meal perfect for lunch boxes or quick dinners. Mothers valued these patties because they used up every scrap while creating something new. The crispy exterior gave way to tender, flavorful filling with each bite. These patties proved that economical cooking could be just as delicious as anything bought fresh. Number 27, red drink with sassafras and hibiscus. The drink was older than the country that had enslaved the people who made it. The recipe came across the ocean from Senegal in the heads of women who could not bring their pots. Dried hibiscus flowers, called bissap in the Wolof tongue, were simmered with sassafras, root, sugar, and a knot of ginger. The picture came out the color of garnet. On Juneteenth tables in Houston, Marshall, and Beaumont, it sat between the brisket and the cake as a memory of West Africa. After the FDA banned saffron, the active oil in sassafras root, in 1960, the drink limped on with red food dye, and by 1978, it had been replaced almost entirely by store-bought strawberry soda. And in late summer, nothing came sweeter than fried corn cut straight off the cob. Your grandmother held each ear upright in a wide bowl, ran a sharp knife down the rows, then went back with the dull side of the blade and scraped hard. That scraping was everything. It pulled the milky starch inside each row, and that liquid turned fried corn creamy without a drop of cream. The kernels went into bacon grease, always bacon grease, never butter, because butter burned too fast, and cooked low, stirring constantly until the corn thickened and clung to the spoon. Salt, black pepper. Some cooks added sugar if the corn was starchy, but the old women said if you needed sugar, you picked it too late. It tasted like August, hot, golden, and gone before you were ready. Chitterlings with hot sauce carried the weight of history in every bite, a dish born from necessity that became a celebration of resilience. Pig intestines were cleaned for hours, boiled slowly with onions, garlic, vinegar, and bay leaves until tender, then served steaming with hot sauce that cut through the richness. The smell was unmistakable, filling kitchens and drifting through neighborhoods. In the 1970s, chitterlings appeared at holiday gatherings and Sunday dinners where elders passed down the knowledge of proper preparation. The texture was chewy and gelatinous, the flavor deep and earthy, balanced by vinegar and heat. Though many younger generations have never tasted them, chitterlings remain a symbol of making treasure from what others discarded. Number 24, Delta hot tamales. These were not Mexican tamales. They were smaller, rolled in cornmeal instead of masa, simmered in a spiced broth, and sold by the dozen out of a pot that stayed on the back burner all night. The filling was seasoned beef or pork ground, fine and packed into corn, shuck wrappers, barely thicker than a cigar. In Greenville, Clarksdale, and every crossroads town between them, hot tamales were juke joint currency. You ate them standing up, unwrapping each one and biting it in half. The broth soaked into the cornmeal and turned the whole thing into something soft and burning hot. When the Delta juke joints closed, a few tamale stands survived on their own. The rest vanished with the rooms that kept them warm. Cornmeal mush with bacon grease was the breakfast that kept black children fed when the cupboard held almost nothing else. Mothers stirred coarse cornmeal into boiling water, cooking it slow until it thickened into dense porridge that could fill the hungriest belly. The bacon grease added precious calories and richness that plain mush couldn't provide. Families saved every drop of rendered fat in coffee cans beside the stove, knowing it would stretch meals through the week. Children ate it hot from chip bowls, sometimes with salt or a drizzle of sorghum. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and filling. This breakfast taught children that resourcefulness meant never wasting anything, not even yesterday's cooking fat. The taste carried memories of wood stoves and mothers who made miracles from almost nothing. Mayonnaise sandwiches were meals eaten in silence, when children knew better than to complain because nothing else filled the refrigerator. 2 slices of soft white bread with a thick smear of mayonnaise was dinner when the month outlasted the paycheck. There was no meat, no lettuce, no tomato, just bread and mayo, eaten at kitchen tables where mothers pretended not to notice disappointment. The sandwich was filling enough to quiet growling stomachs, and mayonnaise provided fat and calories that helped children sleep without hunger pains. Families never talked about these sandwiches outside the home because admitting to them meant admitting to poverty. Children grew up carrying the memory of that taste, soft bread giving way to creamy richness that was never quite enough, but always better than nothing. Number 20, macaroni and cheese baked in church pan-sized casseroles. The pan was the same one that had carried bake sale lasagna to the basement of Mount Olive Baptist for 10 years. Deep, dented in 2 corners. It could feed 30 children. The macaroni cooked in a stock pot before sundown. The cheese was a brick of cheddar grated by hand while the radio played WBLS. Layer macaroni, layer cheese, layer macaroni, layer cheese. Evaporated milk poured over, paprika on top, into the oven for 45 minutes. The crust was the prize. The corner pieces were promised to the woman who carried the pan like a tribute. Nobody disputed it. The thing is, the recipe was never written down. It was passed down by watching. By 1988, the deep pan had cracked, the church basement was rented out for funerals only, and the recipe got reduced to a shoebox pan version that fed 8, not 30. Number 19, liver and onions. This is the dish that split black households right down the middle. A man either loved it or he pushed the plate away, and went to bed hungry. There was no middle ground with liver. Beef liver, sliced thin, dredged in flour with salt and pepper, then fried in a hot skillet with enough oil to make the edges crisp. The onions went in the same pan after, sliced into rings, cooked until they went soft and sweet, served with rice or mashed potatoes and whatever green vegetable was in the house that week. The smell filled every room. It was impossible to hide the fact that liver was being cooked. In the 1970s, a pound of beef liver in most southern cities cost less than 40 cents. It was dense with iron and protein, and doctors used to recommend it for men who worked physical jobs because it built blood and stamina. In the steel towns of Birmingham and Pittsburgh, in the auto plants of Detroit, and in the meatpacking houses of Chicago, liver was what a working man's wife put on the table when she wanted to keep him standing through another week. The taste was strong, metallic almost. Some women soaked the liver in buttermilk overnight to pull the bitterness out, a trick passed from mother to daughter that no recipe book ever documented. By the 1980s, cholesterol warnings turned liver into something people avoided on purpose. Health columns in newspapers told families to cut it from their diet. The men who had eaten it 3 times a month stopped asking for it, and their sons never learned to eat it at all. Today, beef liver sits in grocery store cases marked down to clearance, and almost nobody reaches for it. The cheapest cut in the store, loaded with more iron and B vitamins than any supplement on the shelf, and an entire generation was scared away from it by a newspaper column. Number 20, sweet potato pone, not a pie. A dense, spiced pudding made from raw grated sweet potato, eggs, sugar, butter, milk, and nutmeg, baked in a cast iron skillet until the top cracked and caramelized and the center stayed soft and custard-like. The grating was the labor, raw sweet potato on a box grater by hand until the bowl held enough pulp for a full skillet. Sweet potato pone was older than sweet potato pie and heavier. It sat on the dessert table and drew the people who grew up eating it because nothing in a bakery case looked or tasted anything like it. When food processors replaced the box grater, nobody used them for this. They just stopped making it. The skillet-shaped crust on top was the signature, and it only formed when raw grated potato hit hot iron. No shortcut reproduced it.
Rutabaga with bacon was the overlooked vegetable that earned its place on 1970 soul food Christmas tables through sheer deliciousness. Rutabagas were peeled, cubed, and boiled until tender, then mashed with butter and seasoned with salt and pepper. Crispy bacon pieces were folded throughout, adding smoky richness and satisfying crunch to the sweet, earthy vegetable. Rutabagas cost far less than sweet potatoes, but offered similar comfort and natural sweetness. The vegetable stored through winter, making it practical and affordable. Children who claim to hate vegetables often ask for seconds of bacon-studded rutabaga. The dish proved that creativity with humble ingredients could create new traditions worth continuing. Rutabaga with bacon showed that 1970s soul food embraced innovation alongside heritage.
Gizzards and rice were the meal that taught flavor from labor. Tough at first, the gizzards demanded patience, cleaned, boiled, and seasoned before ever touching the skillet. Grandparents fried them slow with onions, letting the scent of pepper and grease build into something irresistible. Once tender, they met a pot of rice, plain but proud, soaking up all that savory juice. It was not fancy, but it was rich in spirit, feeding families that refused to waste a thing. Gizzards, the part most people threw away, became the centerpiece of a dinner that stuck to the ribs. The sound of the knife chopping, the hiss of the pan, the quiet hum of the stove, all of it felt like music in a home where nothing came easy but everything was earned. It was dinner built from wisdom, not wealth. Each bite carried gratitude and grit, proof that poverty never lacked flavor.
Smothered cabbage with ground beef was the kind of meal you did not brag about at school, but you ate 2 plates of at home. A head of cabbage cost a dime in 1971, and shredded into a skillet with browned beef, onion, and a splash of vinegar, it became something far bigger than its price. The cabbage wilted down slow, absorbing fat from the meat until every ribbon was soft, faintly sweet, and edged with tang. Seasoned with garlic powder, paprika, and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid, this dish descended from cooks who understood that cabbage and pork fat had been partners since the plantation garden. 1 skillet, a head of cabbage, a half pound of beef, enough for 6. The receipt looked like nothing. The plate looked like everything, and the kitchen carried the smell for hours after the stove went cold. But if those skillet meals told the story of weeknight survival, chicken foot stew might raise eyebrows today, but in black kitchens of the 1970s, it was beloved comfort food made from parts others threw away. The feet were scrubbed clean, blanched to remove the outer skin, then simmered until they released natural gelatin into the broth. This created body and richness that regular chicken pieces could not achieve. Potatoes, carrots, and onions joined the pot, soaking up that deeply savory liquid. Some cooks added hot peppers for warmth that went beyond temperature. The stew was valued during winter illnesses when families believed its collagen-rich broth could heal what ailed you. Children sometimes balked at the appearance, but one taste usually converted them. The feet were free or nearly so, making this stew an act of pure kitchen wisdom, taking what was dismissed and creating nourishment. Corned beef and cabbage with pot liquor was a dish that honored the Southern tradition of saving every drop of cooking liquid. After the corned beef was boiled tender, the remaining broth, rich with meat juices, salt, and fat, became precious pot liquor, never discarded. Cabbage was simmered directly in this liquid until it absorbed the meaty essence, turning soft and deeply flavored. Families served the cabbage in shallow bowls with the pot liquor spooned over top, accompanied by cornbread for dunking. The liquid itself was considered nourishing, often given to children for strength. This practice reflected deep understanding that nutrition existed in every part of the cooking process. Saving and using pot liquor was not just frugal, it was wise. The dish carried generations of knowledge. Corned beef and cabbage skillet was the quick weeknight answer for busy mothers who needed dinner on the table fast. Sliced corned beef was fried in a hot skillet until the edges crisped and browned, then joined by shredded cabbage that wilted down quickly in the rendered fat. Onions and garlic added depth while cooking in just minutes. The entire dish came together in one pan in under half an hour, making it practical for households where time was precious. Served over rice or with bread, it was filling and flavorful despite its simplicity. Children loved the crispy bits of meat scattered throughout the soft cabbage. The skillet method proved that good food did not require hours of cooking, just smart technique. It became a standby in kitchens where efficiency and flavor had to coexist. Number 26, salt-cured ham hocks with butter beans. Setting a smoked ham hock in a pot of butter beans was an act of patience and inheritance. The hock had been cured for 8 weeks in a smokehouse out back, hung from a hook above a slow fire of green hickory. When Freedom Day came around in late June, the cook pulled one down, washed off the rind, and dropped it whole into a Dutch oven with a pound of dry butter beans, an onion, and 4 quarts of water. It cooked from sunrise to 2 in the afternoon. The beans turned creamy. The hock fell off the bone. The pot liquor was so salty and rich that older folks drank it from a coffee cup. After 1976, When packaged smoked hocks from the grocery store replaced the home smokehouse, the dish lost the smoke it had been born in. Stewed tomatoes and okra carried a lineage stretching back to West Africa, where okra, brought to the Americas inside the hulls of slave ships, had thickened soups and stews for centuries. In black kitchens of the 1970s, it cost pennies and fed the spirit like a feast. Fresh okra was sliced into rounds and fried first in a hot skillet until the slime cooked off and the edges crisped. That step separated the cooks who knew from the ones who did not. Canned tomatoes went in next, crushed with a wooden spoon, along with onion, garlic, salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. The pot simmered until the okra was tender and the tomatoes had thickened into a sauce that was tangy, savory, and rich. Served over rice, it was a full meal. Served alongside fried fish, it was a celebration. The women who grew that okra in their backyard plots knew exactly which pods to pick, no longer than a finger because anything bigger turned woody. That knowledge came from watching, not reading. In the 1970s, turkey wings and gravy made ordinary weeknights feel like holidays, delivering the richness of Thanksgiving without the expense of a whole bird. The massive wings were seasoned generously with garlic, paprika, and black pepper, then browned before being braised until the meat fell from the bone. The cooking liquid transformed into silky gravy enriched by rendered fat and collagen. Served over rice or alongside cornbread, this dish stretched a few pounds of turkey wings to feed a family of 6. The meat was tender and flavorful, carrying all the satisfaction of roasted turkey at a fraction of the price. Turkey wings were often overlooked at the butcher counter, making them affordable for families counting pennies. This dish proved that celebration did not require extravagance. Number 22, pickled eggs. The jar sat next to the register, just like the pig feet, except it lasted longer because nobody bought them as fast. Whole hard-boiled eggs floated in a vinegar brine tinted red with beet juice or cayenne, depending on the cook. You pointed, the cook pulled one out with a slotted spoon, and you ate it whole or bit it in half over a paper napkin. Pickled eggs were bar food in white roadhouses and juke joint food in black ones, and both versions disappeared for the same reason. Health codes killed the countertop jar. The eggs moved to sealed plastic packages on gas station shelves, floating in a liquid that tasted nothing like what came out of that glass jar sitting on the counter in the heat. Grits with red-eye gravy was breakfast for families who stretched country ham until every bit of flavor was extracted. After frying thin slices of salty ham, mothers would deglaze the pan with black coffee, creating thin gravy that was dark with a reddish tint. That gravy was poured over hot grits, turning plain corn into something deeply savory. The coffee added bitterness that cut through the salt and fat, creating flavors that woke you up as well as any morning coffee could. Children learned to eat it because that's what was served, though many came to crave its strange, compelling taste. Red-eye gravy was Southern tradition born from necessity. The grits underneath soaked up everything, becoming rich with each spoonful. This was proof that poverty could produce complex flavors. Syrup. Sandwiches were the sweet solution when the pantry held nothing but bread and a bottle of caro or pancake syrup. Children watched as mothers folded soft white bread around thick drizzles of golden syrup, creating a sticky, filling meal that satisfied cravings for both dinner and dessert. The syrup soaked into the bread, making it soft and almost cake-like, helping children pretend they were eating something special. There was no protein, no vegetables, nothing nutritious beyond calories, but it was enough to send kids to bed without hunger pains. Syrup sandwiches appeared when paychecks stretched too thin. They were eaten quickly and never mentioned outside the home. For children who grew up on them, the taste of cheap corn syrup still triggers memories of lean times when sweetness was the only comfort available. Number 19, sauce on saltines, the deepest dish on this list. What most people miss about sauce is that it was never a snack. It was a passport. Sauce is hog head, meat, simmered for hours with vinegar, hot peppers, and bay leaves, then poured into a loaf pan and chilled until it set into a trembling brick of pork and jelly. It came up from Mississippi in the suitcases of women who left Greenwood and Yazoo City on the Illinois Central in the 1940s and 1950s. They arrived in the Black Belt of Chicago. By 1976, it was a block party plate in Lawndale and on the South Side, served by elders to other elders on a corner table where the children were not invited. Your great-grandmother brought it down on a saltine sleeve and a paring knife. The slice was thin, the cracker held it, the way a biscuit holds gravy. A pinch of hot sauce went on top from a bottle that had ridden up from Greenville in a handbag in 1953. Sauce was a memory dish. It tasted like a back porch in a town these elders had left at 15. They named the cousins who had taught them the recipe. They named the towns, town after town, generation after generation. The naming was the point. The eating was the proof. By 1985, most of the elders were gone, and Glorious Malone's in Milwaukee was one of the only commercial sauce makers left in the upper Midwest. The brick in the loaf pan was the closing argument of the Great Migration generation. It set, it sliced, and it disappeared. Number 18, salt meat and cabbage. Salt pork was the original American preserved meat, and in the 1970s, it was still cheap enough that a woman could buy a slab for less than $1 and cook it with a head of cabbage to feed the whole family. The salt pork went into the pot first, simmering for an hour until the fat rendered, and the water turned into a rich, salty broth. Then the cabbage went in, quartered, and cooked until it was soft enough to cut with a spoon, somewhere between a soup and a stew, served in deep bowls with cornbread to soak up the liquid. This was a Wednesday night supper, what a family ate in the middle of the week when the weekend groceries were running low and payday was still 2 days out. It required patience and almost no money, and it tasted better than it had any right to. The prepackaged deli meats and boneless cuts that filled stores in the 1990s pushed salt pork off the shelf entirely. Number 19, crackling bread. When a hog was rendered for lard, the crisp bits of skin and fat left behind were the cracklings. They got folded into cornbread batter and baked in a hot cast iron skillet until the bread came out golden, dense, and studded with pockets of salty crunch. Crackling bread required fresh cracklings, which required a family that still rendered its own lard, which required a family that still bought a whole hog or raised one. Each step back revealed another step that modern life had already erased. At a function, a pan of crackling bread sat next to the greens and the beans, and it disappeared faster than the plain cornbread sitting beside it. The crunch told you a family still lived close to the source. When families stopped rendering lard at home, the cracklings vanished from the batter and the bread went quiet.
Watergate salad was the mysterious green dessert that swept through black churches and family reunions during the 1970s Christmas season. Pistachio pudding mix was combined with crushed pineapple, miniature marshmallows, pecans, and whipped topping, creating fluffy sweetness unlike traditional soul food. Nobody knew exactly why it was called Watergate, but everyone agreed it was delicious and easy to make. The pale green color made it festive, and children loved its texture. All ingredients came from cans and boxes, making it affordable during busy holidays. Watergate salad represented the 1970s embrace of convenience while maintaining communal sharing spirit. The salad proved that Black Christmas tables welcome new traditions alongside cherished old ones.
Pinto bean soup was the meal that made hard times taste soft. Grandparents soaked the beans overnight, letting them swell in tin pots while they slept. The next morning, onions, salt, and sometimes a small ham bone went into the water. The kitchen filled with the slow rhythm of simmering, a sound of hope that things would stretch one more day. The broth thickened as it cooked, rich with starch and strength. The smell alone could calm an empty stomach. Sometimes they crushed cornbread into the bowl, letting it soak up every drop. It was food that filled and comforted, humble yet full of soul. Pinto bean soup did not need meat or luxury to matter. It only needed time and patience. Grandparents called it a working man's stew, but it was more than that. It was a reminder that no meal made with love was ever small.
Dirty rice told the story of where those families came from. It started in the bayou parishes of Louisiana, where Creole cooks used chicken livers and gizzards to give white rice its muddy color and deep mineral taste. By the time the recipe traveled north during the migration, many families had swapped organ meats for ground beef, cheaper, easier to find in urban stores, and far less likely to start arguments with children who refuse liver. You brown the beef in bacon grease with the holy trinity of onion, celery, and bell pepper, stirred in garlic, cayenne, and thyme, then folded in cooked white rice. The grains turned gray-brown as they absorbed the drippings, and the whole dish carried a warmth that started at the back of your throat. In New Orleans, old cooks side-eyed any version made without giblets, but in Chicago in '72, ground beef dirty rice was its own tradition. Beef tripe stew was not for the faint of heart, but those who grew up eating it remember the dish with deep affection. Tripe required thorough cleaning and long cooking to become tender, but the result was worth every minute of preparation. The honeycomb texture held onto flavorful broth, making each bite an experience. Black cooks prepared it with tomatoes, onions, garlic, and plenty of pepper, creating a stew with Caribbean and Southern influences intertwined. Some versions included potatoes or hominy to stretch the meal. The dish was considered special occasion food despite its humble origins, served when the family wanted something different. The smell was distinctive, earthy, and rich, announcing to the neighborhood that serious cooking was happening. Tripe stew taught children that texture and flavor mattered more than appearance. Corned beef with creamed cabbage was a dish that brought richness to an otherwise straightforward combination, creating something that felt almost luxurious. The cabbage was shredded and cooked slowly in a mixture of butter, flour, and milk until silky and tender, bathed in velvety cream sauce. Sliced corned beef was arranged on plates with generous spoonfuls of the creamed cabbage alongside. The cream sauce mellowed the cabbage's sharpness, while the salty meat provided contrast. This preparation appeared at Sunday dinners when something refined was called for. It showed that simple ingredients could be elevated through technique without adding expense. Children who normally refused plain cabbage cleaned their plates when served this way. Corned beef with creamed cabbage was comfort food dressed up for company. Number 25, crackling bread. The women cooked crackling bread once a year, the day after hog killing in November, and again on Juneteenth, when the brining barrel still held enough pork skin to render. Cracklings were the crispy bits left over after lard was rendered out of pork fat back. The cook crumbled them into a cornbread batter heavy with buttermilk and a beaten egg, poured the whole thing into a screaming hot skillet of bacon grease, and set it in a wood oven for 35 minutes. The bread came out the color of a chestnut with little salty meat shards hidden in every bite. By the late 70s, Hog killing had moved out of the backyard and into commercial plants, and cracklings disappeared from home kitchens. Pig ear sandwiches were sold at juke joints, neighborhood bars, and roadside stands across the Black South, and the people who ate them did not apologize. The ears were cleaned, boiled for hours until the cartilage softened, then sliced thin and either pickled in spiced vinegar or deep fried until the edges went crisp. Served on white bread with hot sauce, mustard, and dill pickles. The sandwich had a texture nothing else matched. Crunchy where the fat rendered, tender where the meat pulled apart, tangy from the vinegar. The dish came from the nose-to-tail tradition that had fed Black families since slavery, when the ears, feet, and tails were the only cuts passed down to the quarters. At places like the original Cozy Corner in Memphis or Nameless stands in the Mississippi Delta, a pig ear sandwich and a cold drink was Saturday night. Today, those stands are mostly gone. The ears are still cheap, but the hands that slow cooked them have moved on. She kept them in a bag in the freezer, yellow and curled, and when you were young, they frightened you. But your grandmother saw something in chicken feet the grocery store did not. Fried chicken gizzards were a beloved snack that turned an often discarded organ into something crispy, chewy, and irresistible. The muscular stomachs were cleaned, boiled until tender, then dredged in seasoned flour and dropped into hot oil until golden brown. The exterior shattered with each bite while the inside remained dense and meaty, with flavor more intense than regular chicken. In the 1970s, gizzards appeared at fish fries, corner stores, and family kitchens where nothing from the bird went to waste. Children ate them from paper bags with toothpicks, dipping each piece in hot sauce. Adults savored them as the cook's reward, eaten standing at the stove. The price was negligible since butchers practically gave them away. Fried gizzards taught that rejected parts could become treasures. Number 20, fried pork chop sandwich. A bone-in pork chop pounded flat with the back of a heavy knife, seasoned with salt and black pepper, dredged in flour, and fried in a cast iron skillet until the edges browned dark. It went between two slices of white bread with the bone still in. You ate around it. A fried pork chop sandwich was heavier than anything else on the counter, and it was the meal that working men ordered when they had been on their feet since sunrise. The chop was cheap because the cut was thin, and the bread stretched it into something that filled you up for hours. When boneless pork loin replaced bone and chops at most butcher counters, the sandwich lost its architecture. No bone to hold it together, no bone to gnaw when the bread was gone. Canned mackerel cakes were breakfast when money couldn't stretch to fresh fish or even canned salmon. The fish came packed in water or oil, mashed with whatever binder was available, usually cracker crumbs or leftover cornbread. Mothers shaped the mixture into patties and fried them until both sides turned golden and crispy. The flavor was strong and fishy, but it was protein poor families could afford when meat prices climbed too high. Children learned to eat mackerel cakes with hot sauce to mask the intensity, though many grew to love that briny taste. These cakes stretched a single can into breakfast for an entire family when served with grits. The smell announced itself through the whole house. Mackerel cakes represented making do, turning cheap canned fish into something filling and satisfying. Potted meat sandwiches were a fixture of poor Black childhoods, made from those small cans of spreadable mystery meat that cost only pennies. The potted meat was salty, finely ground, and suspiciously smooth, but spread on white bread with mustard or pickle relish. It became a meal that could feed several children from a single can. Nobody asked what was in potted meat because knowing might have made it impossible to eat. Mothers kept cans stacked in the pantry for emergencies, pulling them out when the refrigerator was empty and payday was still distant. The sandwiches were eaten at school from brown paper bags hidden from classmates who might have recognized poverty. Potted meat tasted like survival, salty and metallic. Children who ate these sandwiches remember them with gratitude and something like grief for the lean years. Number 17, pound cake from Aunt Jemima or Sarah Lee. Not every cake on the block was made from scratch. Some came in a yellow box from the bottom shelf of the corner store, like a small confession. A working mother got home at 6 on Friday, slid the foil pan into the oven, came out to the table with the smell of vanilla in the kitchen, and called it her own. The act of pulling it from the oven was the act of caring. Sarah Lee pound cake on a paper plate with a spoon of canned peaches on top from a Del Monte tin was a curb dessert in 1974 that nobody apologized for. The frozen food aisle was a friend to a mother working 2 shifts. The thing is, the cake was never about the cake. It was about who slid it in the oven for you. By 1990, the freezer aisle had grown bigger. The homemade pound cake had moved into a once-a-year holiday slot, and the Saturday curb cake was a sheet from the Pathmark Bakery, plastic domed with no story attached. Number 17, pig feet. A pot of pig feet on the stove was a signal. It meant supper was going to take a while, and when it was ready, a man needed to eat with his hands. Pig feet were braised for hours, sometimes with vinegar and red pepper flakes, sometimes with just salt and an onion. The skin turned gelatinous. The meat, what little there was, clung to small bones and required work to get at. It was not elegant food, it was labor food that demanded labor to eat. In the 1970s, pig feet cost almost nothing because nobody outside of Black and rural white communities wanted them. A butcher would sell a package of 4 for less than the price of a can of beans. The men who ate them grew up watching their fathers eat them, and their fathers before that. It was generational. When the generation broke, the tradition broke with it. Younger families looked at pig feet and saw something they didn't recognize as food. Number 18, fried whiting plates. Whole whiting fish, scaled, gutted, dredged in seasoned cornmeal, and fried in a deep skillet until the tail curled and the skin turned crisp enough to shatter. At an outdoor function, a folding table near the fryer held a stack of paper plates, white bread, and a bottle of hot sauce, and the line started before the first batch came out of the oil. Whiting was the cheapest fish at the market. A family could fry enough to feed a yard full of people for the cost of a single roast. The smell of cornmeal and hot oil carried across the block and told the neighbors exactly what kind of gathering was happening. Today, fish fries still happen, but the whole fried whiting with the head still on, eaten with your hands, bones pulled clean, belongs to a generation that did not need the fish to look polite.
7-layer salad was the 1970s potluck sensation that appeared at Black Christmas gatherings with dramatic layers visible through glass bowls. Iceberg lettuce formed the base, followed by layers of peas, celery, onions, cheese, bacon, and thick mayonnaise dressing on top. The salad was assembled hours ahead, allowing flavors to meld while the dressing sealed everything. Each serving scooped through all 7 layers, delivering crunch, creaminess, and variety in every bite. The dish was affordable since lettuce and frozen peas cost little, while the presentation made it feel special. 7-layer salad showed up at church dinners and family gatherings throughout the 1970s. The salad proved that soul food traditions could embrace new ideas while maintaining communal spirit.
Smothered chicken backs were proof that nothing went to waste in a smart kitchen. The backs were the cheapest part of the bird, bony and overlooked, but in careful hands they became tender miracles. Grandparents fried them first in a cast iron pan, browning the skin to perfection. The drippings turned into gravy, flour, water, and a slow stir until thick and golden. The chicken went back in, simmering until the meat slipped off the bone and the gravy clung to every piece. The smell was deep and familiar, the kind that pulled everyone to the table. A pot of rice sat nearby, waiting to catch all that flavor. It was food born from thrift, yet full of pride. Every bite told the same story, of making do, of feeding many from a little, of turning scraps into something worthy of thanks.
The smell of hamburger gravy meant it was the end of the month. You knew before you walked into the kitchen. Flour browning in hot fat, the sharp hit of black pepper, the soft thud of a wooden spoon against cast iron. Your mother browned a half-pound of ground beef, crumbled it fine, left every drop of grease in the pan, sprinkled flour over the top, and stirred until it turned golden. Milk went in slow, and she kept stirring until the whole thing thickened into a pale brown blanket that clung to the spoon. Poured over split buttermilk biscuits, it was dinner. The dish had roots in the military, where servicemen called it SOS, but in black kitchens, it was simply gravy and biscuits. No pretense, a full meal for 4 people on less than 70 cents. Nobody called it struggle food, not once, because when it was made right, it tasted like being taken care of. And the woman who made it would never tell you she skipped her own plate so there was enough for everyone else. Saturday mornings had their own rhythm. Black-eyed pea stew carried cultural significance beyond its role as winter fare. It was luck food, traditionally eaten on New Year's Day, but enjoyed through cold months. The peas were simmered with smoked meat, usually ham hocks or salt pork, until they became creamy and the broth turned rich with smoky depth. Onions, garlic, and tomatoes joined the pot, adding layers of flavor that made each spoonful interesting. Some cooks added collard greens directly to the stew, creating a complete meal that symbolized prosperity. The peas provided protein and fiber, while smoked meat added fat and flavor that satisfied deep hunger. Children ate this stew, knowing the stories behind it, that peas represented coins and greens represented paper money. This was tradition passed down through generations, connecting families to heritage through every bowl. Corned beef and cabbage with black-eyed peas was a fusion dish that married Irish-American tradition with African-American soul food staples. The corned beef was sliced thin and layered over simmered black-eyed peas cooked with onions, garlic, and ham hock for smokiness. Shredded cabbage was wilted in the pot liquor from the peas, absorbing that earthy, savory flavor. The combination provided complete protein and stretched the meat further than it could go alone. Families served this, especially on New Year's Day when black-eyed peas symbolized luck. The salty corned beef played beautifully against the creamy peas and tender cabbage. It was a dish born of necessity and cultural blending that became beloved in its own right. This combination showed how African-American cooks transformed ingredients into something uniquely their own. Number 24, pickled pigs, feet in red brine. The pickled pigs, feet sat in a glass jar on the back of the icebox for 2 weeks before the celebration. The cook boiled the feet for 3 hours with bay leaf and black peppercorn until the gelatin loosened, then packed them into a quart jar with white onion, garlic, and a brine of cider vinegar tinted with the same red dye she used in the punch. The lid sealed. 2 weeks on the shelf, the feet absorbed the sour and the red. On the holiday, a man could pull one out with his fingers and eat it cold off a paper plate. After 1979, the dish had become a punchline on television, and proud cooks stopped putting it on the buffet. Dirty rice earned its name from how it looked, flecked brown and gray from chopped chicken livers and gizzards stirred through every grain, and anyone from a Louisiana kitchen knew the dish by sight before they tasted it. The livers were sautéed fast until firm but still pink, then chopped fine alongside gizzards simmered tender for an hour. The Holy Trinity, onion, celery, bell pepper, went in next, diced small and cooked in rendered fat until soft. Cooked rice was folded in with green onion, garlic, cayenne, and a splash of Worcestershire nobody measured. By the 70s, dirty rice showed up at reunions, holiday tables, and Friday suppers alongside fried fish. It was never the centerpiece and did not need to be. It made everything else on the plate make sense, and the cook who got the seasoning right never had to ask if people liked it. The empty pot answered. Plain cornbread was the daily bread. Smothered liver and onions divided households but fed families with iron-rich protein when budgets were tight. Beef or pork liver was sliced thin, soaked in milk to temper its metallic edge, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried until golden. Mountains of sliced onions were cooked down in the same skillet until they collapsed into sweet, caramelized strands, then piled atop the liver with rich gravy poured over everything. The combination was earthy and savory, with onions providing sweetness that balanced the liver's intensity. In the 1970s, liver was among the cheapest proteins available, appearing regularly on weeknight tables. Children often resisted until that first bite revealed something surprisingly delicious. This dish remains a memory of skill, transforming humble ingredients into meals worth remembering. Number 18, fresh cracklings, not the bags at the gas station. Fresh cracklings were rendered on site from strips of hog skin, with the fat still attached, fried in their own grease until the skin puffed and turned golden brown. They came out of the pot hot, dusted with salt, and served in a brown paper bag. The crunch was louder than anything that comes out of a factory package. Every juke joint that processed its own hogs made cracklings as a byproduct, and they sold for almost nothing because they cost almost nothing to produce. When home hog processing died out in the rural South, fresh cracklings died with it. The bagged version that replaced them is a different food entirely. Same name on the label, no resemblance in the mouth. Peanut butter and syrup was breakfast that stuck to the roof of your mouth and stayed with you all morning. A thick smear of peanut butter on bread was drizzled with pancake syrup, creating a combination that was sticky, sweet, and rich with protein. The peanut butter provided nutrients growing children needed, while the syrup made it feel like a treat rather than survival food. Families kept both ingredients on hand because they were cheap and lasted weeks without spoiling. The mixture was sometimes stirred together into a paste before spreading. This breakfast appeared on tables across poor Black neighborhoods, a reliable source of calories when fresh food wasn't available. The sweetness balanced the dense richness of peanut butter perfectly. It was filling, affordable, and children actually looked forward to eating it. Tomato sandwiches appeared when summer gardens produced more than families could can, turning ripe fruit into simple suppers that cost nothing. Thick slices of red tomato were laid between soft white bread, spread with mayonnaise and sprinkled with salt. The juice soaked through the bread, making it messy but satisfying on hot evenings when no one wanted to stand over a stove. Children ate these on back porches, juice dripping down their chins, grateful for something fresh when canned goods dominated the rest of the year. The tomatoes came from backyard plots or from neighbors who shared their harvest. There was no meat, nothing that required money, just bread and garden tomatoes that tasted like summer. For poor families, tomato sandwiches were proof that the earth could provide when paychecks could not. Number 16, watermelon halved on cutting boards on the curb. A whole melon came up from a stand in Hunts Point on a Friday evening for $2, sat in a metal wash tub of ice on a stoop, and got cut open at 3 o'clock when the sun was on the east side of the building. The cutter was always the same man, 2 doors down, with a long knife he kept wrapped in a dish towel. He halved it, quartered it, sliced it into wedges that went on a paper plate. Children ate it, leaning forward over the curb so the juice did not stain their Sunday clothes. The seeds got spit into the gutter without comment. The melon was like a clock. When the rinds piled up in the gutter, you knew the afternoon was past its peak. By 1992, the cutting man had passed, the long knife was in his daughter's drawer, and the curb watermelon was a supermarket pre-cut tray with a price sticker. Number 16, fried fatback and greens. Fatback is exactly what it sounds like. A thick strip of pure pork fat cut from the back of the hog with no meat on it at all. Sliced thin, fried until the pieces curled and turned brown, served alongside a pot of collard or turnip greens that had been cooking with a smoked ham hock since noon. The fried fatback added salt and crunch. The greens added everything else. A working man in the Mississippi Delta or the factory neighborhoods of Gary, Indiana, ate this 2 or 3 times a week without thinking about it. Fatback cost next to nothing. The leftover cut that hog farmers practically gave away. When doctors started calling animal fat the enemy of the heart, fatback was the first casualty. It didn't fade, it was sentenced. Number 16, sardine sandwiches. A flat tin of sardines, drained and mashed with a fork, mixed with mustard, a squeeze of lemon, diced onion, and a dash of hot sauce, then spread on saltine crackers or white bread. At outdoor functions, sardine sandwiches sat on a folding table wrapped in foil, and the men ate them standing up near the cooler. Sardines were pantry food. They cost pennies, stored forever, and required nothing but a can opener. The sandwich was not elegant. It smelled like exactly what it was. But the protein stretched far, the flavor was bold, and the people who ate them did not apologize for it. When deli meat became the default, the sardine tin stayed in the cabinet unopened. The men who ate them standing in the yard with hot sauce on their fingers were the last ones who saw nothing wrong with it.
Congealed cranberry salad was the jiggly showpiece that graced 1970s soul food Christmas tables with festive red color and tang. Cranberry sauce was mixed with flavored gelatin, crushed pineapple, celery, and pecans, then poured into molds and chilled until firm. The unmolded salad wobbled dramatically when carried to the table, drawing attention from guests. The combination of tart cranberries with sweet gelatin created complexity that cut through rich meats. Canned cranberry sauce cost little and stretched further when combined with other ingredients. The mold could be made days ahead, freeing oven space on Christmas. Congealed salads represented the 1970s love of creative presentation and make-ahead convenience. The cranberry version proved holiday traditions could be both practical and impressive.
Fried bologna sandwiches were the weeknight heroes of the kitchen. Bologna hit the hot skillet with a sizzle, the edges curling like petals as it browned. Grandparents flipped each slice just once, careful not to burn the good parts. The smell was sharp, salty, and rich, filling the house faster than the hunger could. White bread waited on the counter, sometimes toasted, sometimes soft, and mustard or hot sauce turned it into magic. When money ran short, this sandwich saved the day. It was fast, filling, and full of character. Kids loved the crunch at the edge, the way the heat softened the bread just enough to make it melt in your hands. Grown folks knew it for what it was, a humble blessing. Fried bologna sandwiches tasted like memory and invention, like comfort built on what little was left.
And beef and potato hash was the drumbeat. Somebody was already at the stove, cubing cold leftover potatoes into a hot skillet with a little oil. Ground beef went in next, broken apart with a fork until it married with the potatoes. Onion, salt, pepper, a shake of seasoned salt from that red and yellow Laurie's container that never left the counter. You press the whole thing flat and let the bottom crust, that was the real secret, the crust, turn dark and crispy before flipping it in rough sections. Fried egg on top if you were lucky, hot sauce if you were smart. The dish stretched back through Southern farmhouse breakfasts where nothing from the night before went to waste, and in a 1970s kitchen, that leftover pipeline was not thrift but art. That specific crunch of cast iron crust is something no restaurant has ever replicated because it required a pan seasoned by decades of meals cooked by someone who is no longer here to season anything at all. Smoked turkey, neck stew became a healthier alternative to pork-based dishes while still delivering the deep, smoky flavor that Black families loved. Turkey necks were cheaper than most cuts and provided rich, dark meat that held up beautifully through hours of simmering. The smoking process had already infused them with flavor, so the stew needed little seasoning beyond onions, garlic, and bay leaves. Collard greens or cabbage were often added, cooking down in that smoky broth until silky and tender. Potatoes stretched the meal while absorbing all that savory liquid. This stew was considered lighter than its pork counterparts, but equally satisfying, perfect for families trying to eat better without abandoning. Comfort food. The broth was treasured almost as much as the meat, ladled over rice or sopped up with cornbread. Corned beef and cabbage casserole was the dish that turned leftovers into company food, layered and baked until bubbly and golden. Sliced corned beef lined the bottom of a buttered baking dish, covered with a layer of sautéed cabbage, then topped with creamy mashed potatoes. Some families added cheese for extra richness. The casserole baked until the edges crisped and the layers melded together into something greater than their parts. It was made for potlucks and church suppers where it traveled well and served easily. The presentation elevated humble ingredients into something impressive. Children often preferred the casserole to boiled dinner because of the crispy edges and creamy texture. Corned beef and cabbage casserole represented the transformation of necessity into celebration. Number 21, buttermilk biscuits with sorghum. In 1948, every Juneteenth breakfast in a Black East Texas household started with a sheet pan of biscuits and a brown glass jar of sorghum syrup. The biscuit dough was made with self-rising flour, cold lard cut in with a fork, and buttermilk that had soured on the counter overnight. The cook patted the dough out by hand, never with a pen, and cut the rounds with the same tin can she used for tea cakes. The biscuits baked 12 minutes in a wood oven until the tops cracked open and the bottoms turned brown. The sorghum, dark as molasses, but with a brighter tang, came from a Tennessee mill and got poured over the split biscuits. The whole house smelled like burned sugar and buttermilk. By the late 70s, refrigerator dough in a paper tube had taken over Sunday breakfast. Jars of chow chow, the pickled relish that sat on every table and topped everything from beans to fish. Making it was a late summer project. Green tomatoes that would not ripen before frost, the last cabbage heads, bell peppers going soft, all chopped fine, salted overnight, drained, and packed into jars with hot vinegar, sugar, mustard seed, celery seed, and turmeric that turned the batch gold. In Black households across the Carolinas and Virginia, chow chow was as essential as salt. Some families made it sweet, others loaded it with cayenne until a spoonful burned your eyes. The recipe was the grandmother's, guarded not on paper, but in proportions only she could measure by sight. When the last jar was sealed, she lined them up and counted. If the count was right, the supply lasted until next summer. Too few, and the family felt it by February. Those jars held the whole garden and the woman who put them there. Poke salad was wild food that connected black families to the land and knowledge of generations past. Poke weed grew along roadsides, fences, and forest edges across the South. Its young leaves gathered each spring before they became toxic. The greens required careful preparation, boiled multiple times with water discarded to remove dangerous compounds before being sauteed with bacon drippings, onions, and eggs. The flavor was earthy and slightly bitter, carrying the taste of foraging traditions that stretched back centuries. Gathering poke was a springtime ritual, with elders teaching children exactly which leaves to pick and how to prepare them safely. In the 1970s, poke salad still appeared on tables across rural black communities. Today, few remember how to prepare it safely, making this dish a nearly lost connection to ancestral wisdom. Number 15, boiled peanuts. A cast iron pot of raw peanuts in the shell, covered with salted water and simmered for hours until the shells softened and the peanuts inside turned into something closer to a bean than a nut. They were scooped out dripping wet and served in a cup or a brown paper bag that went translucent with brine. The salt hit your lips before the peanut hit your tongue. Boiled peanuts were porch food and counter food sold at juke joints alongside everything else as a snack between plates. In the rural South, the peanuts came from a local farmer or from the cook's own garden. When peanut farming consolidated and raw green peanuts became harder to find outside of harvest season, the year-round supply vanished. The boiled peanuts survived at roadside stands, but the juke joint pot went cold. Fried cornmeal mush was yesterday's breakfast, reborn into something new the next morning. Leftover mush was poured into a loaf pan and refrigerated until firm enough to slice. Those thick slabs were fried in bacon grease until the outside turned crispy and golden while the inside stayed soft and creamy. Drizzled with syrup or molasses, it became breakfast that felt almost like a treat despite costing nearly nothing. The crispy exterior gave way to smooth, warm mush that melted on the tongue. This was 2 meals from 1 pot of cornmeal, stretching resources in ways only poor families truly understood. Children often preferred the fried version to the original, asking for extra slices. The transformation showed how creativity could make poverty food exciting. Fried mush was proof that leftovers could become something worth anticipating. Cornbread and buttermilk for supper required only 2 things most black households had on hand. Fresh cornbread, baked golden in a cast iron skillet, was crumbled into a tall glass and covered with cold, tangy buttermilk. The combination was eaten with a spoon, each bite delivering gritty sweetness of corn and sharp sourness of fermented milk. It was dinner when nothing else was available and breakfast when morning offered nothing better. Children ate it without complaint because the taste was comforting even when circumstances were hard. The dish stretched back generations, connecting poor families to ancestors who survived on the same combination. There was no meat, no vegetables, but it filled stomachs and carried families through. Cornbread and buttermilk was poverty food that still tasted like home. Number 18, curry goat in foil trays. On Caribbean black blocks in Crown Heights and Flatbush, the foil tray that drew the longest line was the curry goat. Goat shoulder cubed, seasoned with Jamaican curry powder, Scotch bonnet, thyme, and a tin of allspice from a shop on Nostrand. It cooked 4 hours on a back burner in an apartment that smelled like a country your auntie had left in 1971. The tray came down with a ladle stuck in it. White rice underneath, gravy on top, a piece of hard dough bread on the side to push the gravy onto the spoon, the way you would push a memory onto a page. Black American kids tasted it and went home asking their mothers why their own food did not have that smell. The trays sat next to the collards. Both got finished. By 1995, the cook was a citizen. Her children spoke without an accent, and the goat had moved into a takeout box on Church Avenue for $9. Number 15, hog head cheese. Despite the name, there is no cheese in it. Hog head cheese is a cold meat terrine made from the cooked down head of a pig, set in its own natural gelatin, seasoned with vinegar, black pepper, and whatever spices a family kept on hand. The head had to be boiled for hours until every piece of meat fell from the bone. Then the meat was chopped, mixed with the reduced broth, poured into a mold, and left to set in the refrigerator overnight. By morning, it was solid enough to slice. A man ate it cold on white bread or crackers, usually for supper on a hot summer evening when nobody wanted to stand over a stove. In Louisiana, Mississippi, and the Carolinas, hog head cheese sat in a deli case next to the Bologna and Braunschweiger. Local butchers made it in-house. The skill required to make it properly died with the generation that learned it, and the commercial versions that survive today are a shadow of what once sat on a working man's plate. Here's the part that doesn't get talked about. In the 1970s, the cuts of meat that built these suppers cost almost nothing because the rest of America didn't want them. Neck bones, pig feet, oxtails, fatback, organ meat. These were the parts the meat packing industry threw away or sold for pennies to whoever would take them. Black families took them. They turned what the industry called waste into food that held a man upright through 12-hour shifts and 90-degree summers. Then something shifted. The food world discovered these cuts. Oxtails showed up on restaurant menus at $40 a plate. Neck bones appeared in magazine recipes written by chefs who had never set foot in a shotgun house. The prices climbed. The men who had eaten these cuts their entire lives were priced out of their own food. The working man's supper wasn't forgotten. It was taken. Number 17, deviled ham sandwiches on white bread. The little red can with the devil on the label was a staple in black kitchens throughout the 1970s. At functions, deviled ham was spread on soft white bread, cut into triangles and stacked on a plate next to the pimento cheese. There was nothing fancy about it. Ground ham, mustard, pickle relish, and enough salt to carry the whole sandwich. Children ate them by the handful because they were small, soft, and did not require a knife. Adults ate them because they were already made when the first guest showed up early. The can was cheap and fed a crowd fast. Today, the red can still exists on grocery shelves, but it sits mostly untouched. The women who built those sandwich plates moved on to deli trays from the supermarket, and the triangles vanished from the table.
Tomato pie was the savory summer dish that earned its way onto 1970s Christmas tables when families used home canned tomatoes preserved from gardens. A pre-baked pie crust was layered with thick tomato slices, fresh basil when available, and generous amounts of shredded cheese mixed with mayonnaise. The pie baked until bubbly and golden, its aroma filling kitchens with the promise of tangy, cheesy goodness. Each slice revealed layers of red tomato against creamy cheese topping. Tomato pie cost almost nothing when tomatoes came from jars families had put up themselves during summer. It provided vegetable dish and comfort food in one, satisfying both practical and indulgent needs. The pie connected winter celebrations to summer abundance. Tomato pie proved that preserving the harvest paid dividends at Christmas.
Salmon croquettes were the feast that came from a can. Grandparents mixed canned salmon with chopped onions, a little cornmeal, and an egg to hold it together. The mixture sizzled in the pan, forming golden patties that smelled like celebration. Outside, they were crisp and brown. Inside, soft and savory. Served with grits or bread, they turned an ordinary night into something special. Kids called them fish cakes and ate them fast, the crunch echoing across the table. Sometimes a bit of hot sauce went on top for heat, sometimes ketchup for sweetness. No matter how they were served, they were always gone before they cooled. Salmon croquettes proved that flavor came from creativity, not cost. They were rich with pride and memory, the taste of survival wrapped in golden crust.
There was a certain pride in the way she set those stuffed bell peppers on the table, 4 of them standing upright in a baking dish, tops sliced off like little hats, each one filled with a mound of seasoned beef and rice that rose just above the rim. Ground beef browned with onion and garlic, mixed with cooked rice, a small can of tomato sauce, salt, pepper, and whatever dried herbs lived in the cabinet. Spooned into hollowed peppers, set in a dish with a little water at the bottom, sauce poured over the tops, baked until the peppers softened and the edges charred. Green peppers cost about 5 cents each in 1970, and the whole dish came under $1.50. What made it feel like a real dinner was the presentation. Each person got their own pepper, their own vessel. It turned a cheap Tuesday into something worth sitting down for, and that act of making the ordinary feel special was something she never stopped doing, even when nobody thanked her for it. Long before manwich showed up in a can in 1969, chicken gizzard stew turned an often discarded organ into something families genuinely looked forward to eating. Gizzards were cheap at the butcher counter, sold by the pound for far less than other chicken parts. They required long cooking to become tender, but that time transformed their chewy texture into something almost silky. The gizzards were browned first, then simmered with onions, garlic, tomatoes, and potatoes until everything melded together. Some cooks added carrots or celery, while others kept it simple with salt, pepper, and bay leaves. The gravy that formed was dark and rich, perfect for ladling over rice or biscuits. Children who grew up eating this stew developed a taste for organ meats early. The dish represented kitchen wisdom, knowledge that parts others threw away could become dinner. Corned beef and cabbage sandwiches were the lunch counter staple that turned dinner leftovers into handheld perfection. Thick slices of corned beef were piled high on rye bread with soft braised cabbage and a generous smear of mustard. Some families added Swiss cheese and grilled the whole thing until the bread crisped and cheese melted. The sandwiches were hearty enough to fuel a full day's work and portable enough for lunch pails carried to factories. Children begged for them in their school lunches, proud to unwrap something so substantial. The combination of tender meat, sweet cabbage, and tangy mustard created perfect balance in every bite. These sandwiches proved that leftovers could become something entirely new, something worth looking forward to rather than just finishing up. Number 20, hog maw stuffed with rice and sage. Stuffing a hog maw was a job for a steady-handed woman and a sharp paring knife. The maw was the stomach of a hog, scrubbed clean and turned inside out, then rubbed with salt and lemon for an hour. The cook filled the cavity with white rice, ground sausage, finely chopped onion, a fistful of fresh sage from the kitchen garden, and a beaten egg to bind. She sewed the opening shut with kitchen twine. The whole thing went into a roasting pan with a cup of water and baked for 3 hours in a slow oven. Sliced like a sausage, the maw fed 12 people. After 1977, when most American grocers stopped stocking hog stomachs over the counter, The dish slipped out of Black Texas cooking and stayed only in the Pennsylvania Dutch country, where it had always lived a parallel life. Collagen, gelatin, a broth so rich it set like jelly when it cooled. The feet were scrubbed, outer skin peeled after a blanch, nails clipped with kitchen shears. Into the pot with onion, celery, garlic, and bay leaves. Hours later, the liquor had turned golden and thick, the feet broken down until tiny bones pulled from tender meat. In the Caribbean and across West Africa, chicken foot soup was healing food, given to the sick and the newly delivered mother. Black families in the South carried that belief into the 1970s. When supermarkets replaced corner butcher shops, the stew disappeared from most kitchens. The women who made it swore the broth could fix anything. They are gone now. Nobody has found a replacement. Ham hocks and black-eyed peas was New Year's Day tradition, and weeknight sustenance rolled into one pot. The smoked hocks simmered for hours, releasing their salty, smoky essence into dried peas that absorbed every bit of flavor. Onions, garlic, and bay leaves joined the pot, while some cooks added vinegar or hot sauce for brightness. The peas turned creamy while holding their shape, swimming in pot liquor rich enough to be a meal on its own. Served over rice with cornbread for sopping, this dish promised luck when eaten on New Year's, but delivered satisfaction any day. Ham hocks cost almost nothing, yet flavored entire pots of food. This dish carried superstition and survival in equal measure, connecting families to traditions that stretch back generations. Number 14, tripe stew. Tripe is the lining of a cow's stomach, and preparing it for the table was an all-day commitment that most cooks alive today have never attempted. The raw tripe was pale, rubbery, and had a smell that filled the kitchen long before the cooking started. Cleaning it required hours of scrubbing under cold water, then soaking in salt and vinegar to remove the odor. After that, the cook boiled it until tender, cut it into small squares, and simmered it with tomatoes, onions, bell pepper, garlic, and red pepper flakes until the pieces turned soft enough to cut with a spoon. The finished stew was thick, deeply seasoned, and rich in a way that no other cut of meat could deliver. Tripe stew was working food, the kind of dish that told you something about the cook before you ever met her. It showed up in juke joints across the South on cold nights, served over rice or with a wedge of cornbread to soak up the gravy. The people who ordered it knew exactly what they were eating, and they judged the cook by how clean the tripe tasted and how long she had let it simmer. A rushed batch was obvious. The texture gave it away. When supermarkets replaced local butchers and organ meats moved to the bottom shelf or disappeared from the case entirely, the supply chain for fresh tripe collapsed in small towns. The dish required commitment that younger cooks were not willing to make, and an ingredient that their grocery store did not reliably carry. Tripe stew became a dish that older people remembered clearly and could describe in detail, but could not find anywhere, not at a restaurant, not at a family reunion, not even in their own kitchen, because nobody was willing to stand at the sink for 3 hours, scrubbing the raw material before the cooking even started. By the late 1970s, the juke joints were closing faster than anyone counted. Desegregation opened restaurants, motels, and clubs that had been locked to Black patrons for generations. That was progress, and nobody wanted it reversed, but it meant the juke joint lost its monopoly on a Saturday night. At the same time, new highways bypassed the rural crossroads where those rooms sat. Health departments started enforcing commercial kitchen codes on buildings that had never been designed for inspection, and the Great Migration had already pulled young people out of the countryside. What remained were the older owners, the ones who had started cooking in the 1940s and 1950s, running kitchens their children did not want to inherit. When those cooks retired or died, the food left with them. Not because the hunger was gone, because nobody was standing at that stove anymore. Leftover rice with milk and sugar was breakfast that turned last night's side dish into this morning's meal. Cold rice was spooned into bowls, covered with milk and sprinkled with sugar until it became something like cereal, but heartier. Children ate it cold in summer or warmed gently in winter, the rice softening until each spoonful was creamy and sweet. It was breakfast that only happened in houses where food couldn't be wasted, where yesterday's dinner became tomorrow's meal without question. The sugar transformed plain rice into a treat, and milk added the calcium growing children needed. Families with nothing but rice could still serve breakfast, stretching one ingredient across 2 meals. This taught children that resourcefulness meant seeing possibility instead of scraps. Pig feet were the cuts that ended up in poor black kitchens because no one else wanted them. Butchers practically gave them away, those knobby joints that looked nothing like the pork chops wealthier families enjoyed. But slow cooked for hours with vinegar, onions, and bay leaves, pig feet transformed into something tender, the meat falling away from tiny bones. The broth became rich and silky, perfect for soaking up with cornbread. Children learned to navigate the bones and cartilage, sucking the meat clean because there would be nothing else. Pig feet were eaten at kitchen tables where poverty was not discussed, but deeply understood. The dish required patience and knowledge, passed from grandmothers who remembered even harder times. Pig feet was poor folks' food elevated by hands that refused to let hardship win. Number 15, Faygo Rock and Rye, RC Cola, Tropical Fantasy, and Welch's Grape. The soda was free for the kids and the elders both. The soda was a regional code. In Detroit, it was Faygo Rock and Rye in the red can, vanilla and cherry, the bottle your cousins fought over. In Brooklyn, it was Tropical Fantasy in the wax-coated bottle, 25 cents at the bodega, 20 cans for $5 at the cash and carry. In Newark and the Bronx, it was Welch's Grape Soda, purple lips on every child by 4 o'clock. RC Cola filled in everywhere else. The host paid for none of it because the numbers runner walked the block on Friday afternoon, took the host's hand, and said, "The sodas are on me." That is how a block party in 1976 got its sweetness paid for. Now, the numbers runner is a memory. The sodas are still on the shelf. The economy that put them in a kid's hand for free is gone. Number 14, chitterlings. The full word is chitterlings, though almost nobody who actually cooked them ever called them that. These are the cleaned small intestines of a hog, and they required more preparation than any other meal on this list. The cleaning alone took hours. A woman had to wash them in cold water multiple times, removing every trace of waste, turning them inside out, scraping the lining with the knife. The smell during cleaning was enough to clear a house. There were no shortcuts. Once clean, chitterlings went into a pot with onion, garlic, vinegar, and red pepper flakes and simmered for 4 to 5 hours until they turned tender. Served with hot sauce and a side of greens, they were one of the most polarizing foods in the black community. Some families reserved them for holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas. Others ate them whenever a man brought home a bucket from the butcher, which in the 1970s cost less than $2 for 10 pounds. Cleaning chitterlings was not a chore, it was devotion, done by women who understood that a working man needed something real, and real food required real work. A man ate chitterlings in 10 minutes that his wife had spent half a day preparing, and the kitchen smelled like them for 2 days after. Younger generations refused to touch them, not because of the taste, which is mild and almost neutral when cooked properly, but because of the cleaning process and the stigma that mainstream food culture had attached to intestines. The word itself became something people whispered. What was once a staple of the Black working household became something people denied ever eating, even the families who had served them every Christmas for 50 years. That denial is its own kind of forgetting. Number 15, pickled peaches. Whole clean peaches, peeled and simmered in a syrup of vinegar, sugar, cinnamon sticks, and whole cloves, then packed into mason jars and sealed. The peaches turned a deep amber and carried a flavor that was sweet, tangy, and spiced all at once. At a holiday function, a dish of pickled peaches sat on the table next to the ham, and the pairing was deliberate. The acidity cut through the salt and fat of the meat, making them require ripe peaches in season, a canning setup, and an afternoon of standing over the stove. When the peach tree in the yard was cut down and the canning pot was put away, the jars stopped lining the pantry shelf. Store-bought pickled peaches exist, but they taste like syrup. The homemade ones tasted like a yard and a season and a woman who planned 6 months ahead.
Sakatumi cake was the 1970s phenomenon that became mandatory at Black Christmas gatherings. Its cinnamon swirl and rich glaze making it irresistible. Yellow cake mix was enriched with sour cream, oil, and eggs, then layered with brown sugar, cinnamon, and pecans before baking into moist perfection. The cake earned its playful name from the popular comedy catchphrase, and saying it while serving became part of the fun. A simple glaze of powdered sugar and milk drizzled over the finished cake added sweetness and shine. The recipe appeared in church cookbooks and was passed between neighbors on index cards. Sakatumi cake proved that box mixes could be transformed into something special with clever additions. The cake represented 1970s creativity and community in every slice.
Cabbage and smoked sausage was the one-pot wonder that could feed a crowd. A single sausage link, sliced thin, was all it took to flavor an entire head of cabbage. Grandparents threw it all in a big pot with onions, pepper, and a spoon of grease. The cabbage wilted slow, its pale green turning gold in the steam. The smell filled every corner of the house, warm and inviting. Served with rice or cornbread, it made a full meal out of scraps. Each bite was smoky, sweet, and soft, the taste of making enough for everyone. It was not fancy, but it was always filling. Even when the sausage was barely there, its flavor carried through the whole dish. It was the kind of food that brought everyone to the table and kept them grateful.
Black mothers were making sloppy joes from scratch. Ground beef, tomato paste, ketchup, brown sugar, mustard, vinegar, and Worcestershire sauce cooked down until the mixture went thick and glossy, spooned onto the softest white buns you could find, 19 cents for a pack of 8. It was the kind of meal children measured in stains, sauce on wrists, on shirt fronts, pooling on the plate where you mopped it up with the last scrap of bread. Every woman had her own ratio of sweet to acid, and she guarded it like she guarded her cast iron. The canned version eventually won the convenience war, but it never touched the original. The women who made it from memory never switched over, and when they were gone, their ratios vanished with them. Nobody wrote it down. That was always the problem with the best things from those kitchens. They lived in hands, not on paper. If the skillet meals kept you fed, the stews kept you warm, and when the weather turned cold and the gas bill climbed, pinto bean and sausage stew was hearty weeknight fare that stretched a small amount of meat into a meal substantial enough to feed a crowd. The beans were soaked overnight, then simmered with sliced smoked sausage, onions, garlic, and tomatoes until everything became tender. The sausage released its fat into the broth, creating richness that permeated every bite. Some cooks added chili powder or cumin for warmth, while others kept seasoning simple. This stew was often made on Sundays and reheated throughout the week, each serving tasting better than the last. The beans provided protein and fiber, while sausage satisfied cravings for meat without breaking the budget. Children grew up eating this stew over rice, learning that simple ingredients cooked with care could rival anything. Corned beef and cabbage with cornbread dumplings was a dish that stretched one pot into a complete meal, requiring nothing else on the table. The corned beef simmered in seasoned broth with cabbage wedges until tender, then spoonfuls of cornbread batter were dropped directly into the bubbling liquid. The dumplings puffed up and cooked through, absorbing the rich broth while maintaining their cornmeal texture. Families ladled everything into deep bowls: meat, cabbage, dumplings, and plenty of broth. The dumplings turned soup into something more substantial, filling bellies that needed fuel for hard work. This was made when bread was running low or when something different was needed. It showed the ingenuity of cooks who understood that starch could come from many places, adding Southern character to an already beloved combination. Smothered corned beef and cabbage was the dish that proved even already tender meat could benefit from more time in the pot. Number 19, smothered oxtails over white rice. The oxtails came from the meat market on Saturday morning, 10 pounds for a couple of dollars in 1963. The butcher cut them at the joints. The cook seasoned the pieces with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, dredged them in flour, and browned them in bacon grease until the outsides went mahogany. Into the Dutch oven, they went with 3/4 onions, 2 stalks of celery, a green bell pepper, a bay leaf, and enough water to cover. The pot sat on the lowest burner for 4 hours. The gravy thickened on its own. The meat slid off the bone in long brown ribbons. Served over rice that had cooked plain in chicken broth, a single pot of oxtails fed 8 people with seconds for the children. After 1979, when oxtails became expensive cult cuisine in city restaurants, working black families could no longer afford to put them on a Juneteenth table. Crackling cornbread was the Sunday version. Cracklings folded into the batter, nuggets of rendered pork skin that added salt, fat, and a crunch you heard across the table. The cracklings came from hog killing day, when fat was rendered in a wash pot outdoors, and the solids left behind were pressed, salted, and sealed in lard jars. A handful went into the mix: stone ground yellow cornmeal, egg, buttermilk, a pinch of soda, and enough bacon drippings to grease the skillet until it smoked. The batter hit screaming hot iron, and the bottom crust formed instantly, golden, almost caramelized. You ate it hot, split with butter, or crumbled into pot liquor. The sound of breaking a wedge was specific: a clean snap followed by a soft crumble. And if it did not make that sound, the skillet was not hot enough when the batter went in. That kind of detail, only the women who baked it 3 times a week ever carried. Long before that iron cooled, the jars were lining the counter. Mason, chitlin loaf took the intense flavor of chitterlings and transformed them into something sliceable and easier for skeptics to approach. Cleaned and cooked chitterlings were ground or chopped fine, mixed with cornmeal, eggs, onions, and seasonings, then packed into loaf pans and baked until firm. The result was dense and savory, with the distinctive chitlin flavor mellowed by the cornmeal binder. Sliced and fried until crispy on the outside, chitlin loaf became breakfast alongside eggs or dinner with greens. This dish represented innovation born from tradition, finding new ways to enjoy ancestral foods. In the 1970s, chitlin loaf appeared at church suppers and family gatherings. The dish has nearly vanished, known only to those who remember kitchens where creativity transformed humble ingredients. Number 16, fried hand pies. A circle of dough rolled thin, filled with sweetened peach preserves or sweet potato, folded in half, crimped shut with a fork, and fried in the same oil as the fish. The outside turned golden and flaky. The inside was molten. You burned your mouth on the first bite every single time, and nobody waited for it to cool. Fried hand pies were the juke joint dessert you could carry in one hand while the other held a drink. When the juke joints closed, commercial bakeries tried to replicate them, but the factory version used apple filling from a can and a dough that tasted like cardboard. The original filling came from a mason jar of preserves put up the summer before. That jar was the recipe, and nobody sold it in a store. Hoe cakes with Strico lean was country breakfast that told the world your family had rural roots and empty pockets. Hoe cakes were simple cornmeal flatbreads cooked on a grease griddle until golden, edges crispy and centers dense. Strico lean, the fattiest and cheapest pork available, was sliced thin and fried until some parts crisped while others stayed chewy. Together they made a plate that was salty, filling, and heavy enough to fuel a morning of hard work. The pork fat dripped onto the hoe cakes, flavoring them without needing butter. This was breakfast from slavery times that survived because poor families still needed cheap food that satisfied. Children grew up eating hoe cakes without knowing their history. The combination represented both heritage and hardship, food that refused to disappear because people still needed it. Vienna sausages were the emergency protein that lived in pantries waiting for the worst days. Those small cans of soft, pale sausages packed in broth cost almost nothing and required no cooking. Children ate them cold, straight from the can, or heated in a skillet with whatever else was available. The sausages were salty and soft, with a texture some children loved and others tolerated because there was no alternative. Mothers kept cans hidden for when everything else ran out. The sausages could be stretched into a meal with crackers or bread, providing enough protein to keep small bodies going. Vienna sausages appeared in school lunches and late-night suppers, always with the understanding that asking for something better was not an option. The metallic taste of those small sausages still brings back memories of lean times. Number 14, sweet tea from a folding table jug, the deepest social ritual on this list. What most people miss about the tea is that it was never about the tea, it was about who poured. The jug was 2 gallons, glass with a plastic lid, set on a folding table at the corner of Lenox and 145th from 1 o'clock until the ice melted. The tea brewed all day on a windowsill in a sun jar, 4 Lipton bags floating in cold water under the August sun until the water turned the color of weak coffee. 2 cups of sugar went in warm. A whole lemon slice floated on top like a small wheel. The jug came down by elevator at 1, set on the table by a woman in a church dress. She decided who got poured first. The order was not random. Eldest first, oldest woman before oldest man. Children with empty cups waited their turn without complaint because your mother had told you on the way down the stairs. The pour was 4 ounces. The cup was paper. The woman holding the jug had grown up on a porch in Greenville, South Carolina, where her own grandmother had poured the same way in the same order. The pouring was the social architecture of the block. Generation after generation, the rules were passed down by watching, not by telling. A man could be drunk on Schlitz and respected on the curb only if he held his cup out and said, "Please." A child could be loud all afternoon and still get poured if she came over quietly with both hands. By the late 1980s, the woman in the church dress had passed. Her daughter worked Saturdays. The jug was washed and put in a basement, and the tea on the new block was poured from a plastic Arizona bottle on a kitchen counter. The order of the pour was the first thing to die when the elders left. Number 13, salmon croquettes. Canned pink salmon, mashed with egg and cracker crumbs, shaped into patties, fried in grease until the outside turned golden and crisp. One can made 6 patties. A man could eat 3 of them with white bread and be full. The women who made them bought the cheap pink salmon, never the expensive red sockeye, and the bones inside were soft enough to crumble right into the mix. Salmon croquettes were a Friday supper in many black households, partly from Catholic neighbor influence on Southern food culture, partly because fish was cheaper than meat at the end of the week. They had a crispy outside and a soft, briny middle that was satisfying in a way frozen fish fillets never managed. When those frozen fillets flooded grocery stores in the 1980s, the can of salmon moved to the back of the shelf. Making croquettes required effort. The frozen aisle required none. Number 12, smoked sausage and rice. Sliced smoked sausage, browned in a skillet, mixed with rice, and maybe a can of tomatoes. This was the meal a woman could start when she heard her husband's truck pull into the yard and have on the table by the time he washed his hands. In the Carolinas and Georgia, smoked sausage came from local smokehouses that cured their own meat. A single rope of sausage fed a family of 4 when stretched with enough rice. No spice blend, no recipe card, just smoke and salt and starch. The local smokehouses closed one by one through the 1980s, replaced by vacuum-sealed national brands that tasted like salt and food coloring. The smoke was gone from the sausage. The supper lost its anchor. Number 14, Japanese fruitcake. The name had nothing to do with Japan. This was a southern layer cake that showed up at black holiday functions and church homecomings from the early 1900s through the late 1970s, and making one was an all-day commitment. The cake itself was built in layers, some plain white, some spiced with cinnamon and allspice. The filling was the labor: fresh coconut cracked and grated by hand, raisins chopped fine, pecans toasted and broken, all of it folded into a cooked filling, thickened with sugar and lemon juice until it set firm enough to hold the layers together. The finished cake stood tall, heavy, and fragrant with spice and citrus. It was not a cake you made on a weeknight. It was a cake you started early on Saturday morning and finished by the time the sun went down. The coconut alone took an hour, cracking the shell with a hammer, prying the meat out, peeling the brown skin, and grating the white flesh on a box grater until your arm ached. At a function, Japanese fruitcake sat on the dessert table and drew a crowd that knew what it cost in labor to get there. One slice told you how long the woman had been baking and whether she learned from someone who took it seriously. The plain white layers provided the structure. The spice layers gave the warmth, and the filling held everything together with a texture that was grainy, sweet, and sharp with lemon all at once. Grocery stores never carried it. Bakeries never offered it. When the generation that baked it stopped standing in the kitchen, the cake left the table without a replacement. Nothing else tasted like it because nothing else required the same combination of patience, ingredient sourcing, and physical effort. The name still circulates in older recipe collections, but the cake itself has not appeared at a function in decades.
Corn pudding was the creamy casserole that transformed humble canned corn into something decadent on 1970s Christmas tables. Cream-style corn was mixed with eggs, milk, butter, sugar, and flour, then baked until puffed and golden with caramelized edges. The texture fell between custard and souffle, sweet enough to almost pass for dessert, yet savory enough to accompany meats. Corn pudding cost little since canned corn was cheap and other ingredients were pantry staples. It could be assembled quickly and baked while other dishes finished. Children loved its sweetness while adults appreciated how it complemented ham and turkey. Corn pudding appeared at church potlucks and family dinners throughout the South. The dish proved that convenience ingredients could create something celebratory.
Pig feet with hot sauce turned thrift into celebration. The feet simmered for hours in a big pot with onions, vinegar, and pepper, until the meat turned tender enough to slip from the bone. The air grew thick with spice and memory, the kind of smell that called everyone to the kitchen. Grandparents served them steaming, with hot sauce on the side and cornbread ready to catch the juices. The flavor was bold, rich, and full of soul, a taste that made you pause and savor. It was food for gatherings, for laughter, for long nights spent together. Every bite was messy, sticky, and worth the wait. Pig feet taught patience and appreciation, reminding everyone that nothing in the kitchen should ever be wasted. In every pot boiled the lesson that hard work and good seasoning could turn even the humblest cut into something to be proud of. It was a dish that didn't hide its roots. It celebrated them. Families would sit shoulder to shoulder, wiping their hands between bites, laughing at stories told for the 100th time. The sound of bones clinking against plates was its own kind of music. The hot sauce gave each bite a spark, a fire that matched the spirit of the people who made it.
Salisbury steak carried a quiet dignity in a household where ground beef was the only cut you could afford. You mixed the meat with breadcrumbs, a beaten egg, minced onion, and a splash of Worcestershire sauce, then shaped it into thick ovals that looked, if you squinted, like something closer to a real steak. Browned in a skillet until a dark crust formed, set aside while you made the gravy in the same pan. Canned mushrooms, a little butter, flour stirred into the drippings, broth poured slow until the sauce went thick and brown. The patties simmered in it and came to the table over mashed potatoes or egg noodles. Swanson had been selling Salisbury steak in TV dinner trays since the 1950s, but the homemade version was something else entirely. Every mother who made it was taking the cheapest meat in the store and turning it into something that felt earned. The children who ate it never knew the cost until they grew up and tried to make it for their own families, standing alone in a kitchen that used to be full. Beef shank stew transformed one of the toughest, cheapest cuts into something that rivaled expensive roasts in flavor and tenderness. The shanks were cross-cut to expose the marrow, then browned deeply before being covered with water or stock. Hours of gentle simmering broke down tough connective tissue into gelatin, creating a broth so rich it set solid when chilled. Onions, carrots, celery, and potatoes joined the pot, soaking up that beefy essence. The marrow was considered the prize, spread on bread or stirred into the stew for extra richness. This was Sunday dinner food, started in the morning and ready by evening. Families gathered, knowing the wait had been worth it, each bite tender and deeply satisfying. Beef shank stew proved patience could transform humble cuts into something special. Corned beef and cabbage with sweet potatoes was a combination that brought natural sweetness to balance the salt of the meat. Chunks of sweet potato were added to the pot during the last hour of cooking, absorbing the briny broth while maintaining their structure. The cabbage and sweet potatoes cooked together, their sugars caramelizing slightly. Families served everything in shallow bowls, ensuring each portion had meat, cabbage, and orange fleshed potato. The combination was popular in Southern households where sweet potatoes were garden staples. Children who might refuse plain cabbage ate it happily when sweet potato was involved. This variation showed how African American cooks adapted recipes to include affordable ingredients. Sweet potatoes turned corned beef and cabbage into something that felt native to the South. Number 18, sweet potato pone. In 1947, a sweet potato pone sat on a dessert table next to the pie and got eaten first. Pone was not pie. The cook grated raw sweet potatoes on a hand box grater into a wooden bowl, added a cup of cane syrup, 2 beaten eggs, a stick of melted butter, a heavy spoon of cinnamon, and half a cup of flour. The whole batter went into a buttered baking dish and into a slow oven for an hour and a quarter. The top set into a thin caramel crust. The middle stayed soft and dense, the color of a copper penny. A square fed one hungry uncle. The dish was simple, sweet, and almost free. And after frozen pie crusts hit the grocery aisle in the early 80s, nobody made it from scratch anymore. Every kitchen had one. A glass, bottle, usually an old hot sauce jar or a repurposed vinegar bottle filled with tiny bird peppers steeping in white vinegar until the liquid turned pale orange and the heat settled in deep. Pepper sauce was never bought. It was made. Your grandmother dropped fresh peppers from her garden into that bottle every summer, topped it off with vinegar, and let it sit on the table year-round beside the salt, pepper, and hot sauce. You shook it over greens, over beans, over rice, a few drops at a time because the vinegar carried more fire than it looked. Through the 70s, that bottle was a household signature. Each household sauce tasted different depending on the peppers grown, how long they steeped, and whether the cook added garlic or a pinch of sugar to round the edges. When your grandmother passed, somebody kept her cast iron, somebody kept her mixing bowls. Nobody thought to save that pepper bottle. Nothing from the store has ever come close to what was inside it. Time equals 1 second/greater. Fried corn with bacon was summer captured in a skillet, celebrating the brief weeks when fresh corn overflowed from gardens and roadside stands. Kernels were cut from the cob, then scraped to release the milky liquid that would thicken the dish. Bacon was fried until crisp, then crumbled while the corn cooked in the rendered fat, caramelizing slightly at the edges. Onion, salt, and pepper were all the seasoning needed when the corn was this fresh. The dish came together quickly, but delivered sweetness, smoke, and richness in every spoonful. In the 1970s, fried corn appeared at summer cookouts and weeknight suppers when gardens produced more than families could eat fresh. This was seasonal cooking at its purest, impossible to replicate with frozen corn. Number 12, thick-cut fried bologna. The bologna came in a whole roll, not pre-sliced, and the cook cut it by hand into rounds as thick as a finger. Each slice went into a hot skillet and fried until the edges curled up and the center puffed into a dome. The crust on the outside carried more flavor than the meat inside. It was served on white bread with mustard, sometimes with a raw onion slice, and it cost next to nothing. Fried bologna was the juke joint equivalent of a hamburger, except it required no grinding, no shaping, and no grill. Just a knife, a skillet, and a roll of processed meat. The dish was never fancy and never pretended to be. It fed people who were hungry and did not have time to wait for a full plate. When the juke joints closed, fried bologna moved to home kitchens and school lunches, where it stays to this day, just without the music. Cold biscuits and sorghum was breakfast when there wasn't time or fuel to heat anything up. Yesterday's biscuits, stored in a cloth-covered bowl, were split open and drizzled with thick sorghum syrup. The biscuits weren't soft anymore, but still edible, their dense texture soaking up the dark sweetness. This was breakfast, eaten standing at the counter or walking out the door, a meal for mornings when work couldn't wait. Sorghum was cheaper than store-bought syrup and carried a deeper, almost smoky sweetness that defined Southern poverty cooking. Children learned to appreciate cold biscuits because complaining meant going without. The combination was simple but sustaining, carbohydrates and sugar to fuel whatever the day demanded. Cold biscuit breakfast showed that poor families didn't always have hot meals. Number 13, black-eyed peas with rice. Hoppin' John traveled from a low-country kitchen up the Atlantic seaboard and arrived on a folding table on a curb in Brooklyn in the 1970s. The dish was simple: ham hock smoked the night before, peas soaked in a bowl on the radiator, white rice cooked alongside, mixed in the foil tray at the last minute so the rice did not get cloudy, a pinch of black pepper on top. Your grandmother put a small spoon next to it because the elders ate small portions. For luck, they ate bigger portions of the macaroni. In the South, Hoppin' John was a new year's plate. On the block in July, it was a memory you could chew. By 1988, the dish had moved almost entirely back to a New Year's Day table inside the apartment. Most blocks lost it without noticing. Number 11, fried chicken backs and necks. Grocery stores in the 1970s sold chicken backs and necks by the bag for almost nothing. These were the parts left over after the breasts, thighs, and drumsticks were packaged at higher prices. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, then fried in a deep skillet until the skin was dark and crackling. A man ate them with his hands, pulling small bites of meat from between the bones. There was no polite way to eat a chicken back. It required teeth and patience and a pile of napkins. Children fought over the necks. The backs had pockets of fat that rendered during frying and left the meat impossibly moist. Grocery chains stopped selling them to the public, grinding them into pet food and processed chicken meal instead. The profit was higher that way. A man's supper became an animal's. The stove is the same. The cast iron is the same. What disappeared is the hand that seasoned the pot without looking at a card, and the table full of people who showed up knowing exactly what was on it. If one of these foods brought back a kitchen you have not stood in for years, go find the recipe this week. Oxtails, smothered corn, lima beans with a ham hock, whatever your family called supper on a Wednesday. Name the one you grew up eating that you did not hear in this video. Some of these recipes only survive in the memory of the person watching this right now.